Hi, my name is Netta Neharai, and I am the CEO and founder of HOA Organizers. I am so excited to have you join us today for our 10th annual ABCs of HOAs. This event is near and dear to my heart. I first put this event together because I really wanted to find a space to share information in a fun and easy way and deliver empowering information and knowledge to board members. Yes, some of you are HOA Organizers clients and some of you are not, but this space is for you. I want you to know that our team has really carefully thought about situations, matters that affect all of us right now, and we have put together topics that are extremely relevant and cutting edge. What I hope sincerely is that you'll take back information from today, right back to your communities, and be able to implement the tools and the topics and information that we've provided and shared with you. So thank you again for taking the time to empower yourself and for being here on your Saturday and joining us on this 10th annual ABCs of HOAs. Don't forget, we have tons of raffle prizes at the end of the day, so make sure to stick around and see if you are one of our lucky winners. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy today's presentations. I am honored and excited to welcome Adrienne Adams today. Adrienne will be the first speaker to kick off the ABCs of HOAs. And I do want to thank Adrienne especially because Adrienne has spoken at every single ABCs of HOA. So this is his 10th year. Adam Sterling, his firm, has also been a sponsor at every single ABCs of HOAs. We can't do what we do without our sponsors. And I really want to thank you, Adrienne. So let me introduce him a little bit more deeply. Adrienne is the founder and managing partner of Adam Sterling. He has an extensive background in the community association industry. Adrienne is one of the leading attorneys in California, specializing in common interest developments. He founded Adam Sterling PLC and quickly grew the firm into a preeminent boutique firm specializing in high-rise condominiums, stock cooperatives, business parks, lake associations, golfing communities, equestrian associations, and oceanfront communities. Seeing the need to educate board members and homeowners, Adrienne created a free research website called davissterling.com that quickly became the #1 resource for everything related to the laws affecting residential and mixed-use common interest developments in California. This was then followed by commercialcid.com for commercial and industrial common interest developments. Adrienne also publishes the Adam Sterling newsletter that has become the largest circulating newsletter of its kind in the state. Adrienne joins us today to be giving us or delivering us with the 2023 legislative update. Adrienne, again, welcome to the stage. Thank you for kicking us off today and for being here.
We have this breaking story coming into HOA news today that the Davis-Sterling Act, the landmark 1985 legislation governing condominiums and common interest developments up and down the state of California, has been rescinded. This law, which since its adoption has gone on to cover nearly 10 million people in 50,000 community associations across California, will no longer be in effect. This means that thousands of volunteer members of boards of directors in communities large and small will no longer be subject to its arcane restrictions. No longer will boards be required to give 10 days notice before calling errant homeowners to disciplinary hearings. No more will tabulated election results have to be posted in the common areas within 15 days of elections. And gone are the days when agendas will have to be posted no less than 96 hours in advance of open board meetings. With these burdensome restrictions lifted, board members, it is time to celebrate. And now, excuse me one second. All right, I'm sorry, I'm being told by our producers that there is a slight error in our reporting and on this topic, and that the Davis-Sterling Act, governing associations across the state of California, has been amended rather than rescinded. HOA News regrets the error. Keep on posting those agendas.
All right, thank you for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this session. We're going to be covering the new laws that went into effect this year affecting homeowner associations, and we're going to cover a few of the cases that were decided that are somewhat interesting, and I think may have some application to you as boards of directors and managers that you should be aware of. So let's look at the first one, which is AB 1410, dealing with social media. And this is an unnecessary piece of legislation. What it says is members and residents can use social media to criticize an association. Well, they've always had that ability. It's called the First Amendment. So we're not exactly sure why this needed to be done, but they passed it anyway. And also that associations cannot retaliate against someone for exercising their free speech rights. So if an owner is on Nextdoor or Facebook or Twitter, they can say whatever they want. So what they can't do though is use the association's website. So if the association has a website, they're not allowed to go ahead to go onto it and criticize the association. And another thing is that boards should not set up their own Nextdoor account and be on that account. We don't recommend that boards be active on those accounts because things can get heated and things get said that can come back to bite a board. So boards should be careful about what they're saying outside of board meetings. Okay, the next one is declared emergencies, AB 1410. And all this says is that associations cannot take an enforcement action during a declared emergency. And so where we think that really will affect associations is if there's a drought emergency. So associations in a drought emergency could not enforce requirements that members water their lawns. So this came up before in the last drought emergency. I expect that we'll see this come up again. And if a member is not able to comply because of the emergency, the association cannot take any kind of enforcement action against them. So it's just common sense. Okay, this one is a little troubling. AB 916, dealing with bedroom additions. And what this does is it streamlines the process for city or counties to approve reconfiguring existing house to create more bedrooms. So what is happening here is the legislature is pushing really hard to create as many bedrooms, houses, ADUs, rentable properties as possible to try and deal with the homeless crisis. And so what it does is it means that an association with restrictions, those restrictions very likely will be overridden. So that someone wants to add a room to their house over the garage, a bedroom, the county or the city will approve it. We already have where they're pushing hard on ADUs so they could convert a garage into an ADU. What we don't know is, are they going to be looking at allowing them to take existing bedrooms and divide them in half and make 2 bedrooms? Take a den, turn it into a bedroom. And if that's the case, we may see then a house that has 3 bedrooms suddenly having 5, 6, 7 bedrooms plus an ADU and being used as a dormitory. So we hope that that's not what's intended here. So we'll just have to monitor it closely and report out what's happening. And if there's an opportunity to oppose that kind of legislation, then we will send out alerts to everyone. Leasing restrictions, AB 1410, already from legislation passed last year, associations cannot require leases longer than 30 days. That was AB 3182. What they did this year was to pass legislation saying now associations cannot prohibit leases longer than 30 days. Don't know exactly why they felt that was necessary. So what it means now is associations You cannot require leases longer than 30 days, and you cannot prohibit them for longer than 30 days. The whole point here again is trying to open up as many rental opportunities as possible, and the state is, I think, inappropriately pushing this through. They should have made exceptions for associations that are already high density. And an increasing rental properties within community associations can impact lending requirements, because lenders don't like real high rental populations. So I'm not a real fan of what's happening here with this legislation, but it is what it is. Okay, another one dealing with rent restrictions. This is a reminder that and then this is from legislation from last year, that if you have rent restrictions in your CC&Rs, for example, if you require that leases be longer than 30 days, not only can you not require that anymore, you have to remove it from your CC&Rs. So you have to just take it out, amend your CC&Rs to remove it. And this is something that boards can do without having to go to the membership, because it's required by statute. The other thing is, if you have a rental cap, it's common for rental caps at 10%, 15%. Those are now voided. And also you have to remove those from your CC&Rs. They're allowing up to 25%. So you can change, if you have a rental cap of 10% in your CC&Rs, the board can amend it, take it to 25%. There is a penalty of $1,000 if you don't amend your document. So this is just a reminder to all boards. If you have these kinds of restrictions, you can, on your own, without membership approval, you have to let them know, notify them that you're making the change. And we've been doing a number of these for clients, for our clients around the state. So it's important that you be aware of this and that you get these changes made. Okay, accessory dwelling units, another bill dealing with them. Seems like we're getting one every single year. And this one removes restrictions on ADUs and numerous kinds of restrictions dealing with local agencies. Also, it's making it easier to demolish garages and replace them with an ADU. And this also would be detached garages as well as attached. So the ability to convert those. So if it's an attached, it's part of the unit. You're not going to be demolishing it so much as remodeling it. If it's detached, they may be allowed to tear it down and build something, and build it with a higher maximum limit as well. And then also that decisions by public officials must be objective. Where this is important that they said public officials is that the association's architectural committees still have a role in this, in making sure that this detached garage that they're tearing down and replacing with an ADU will match architecturally with the rest of the community, with the rest of the association. Another one is dealing with electric vehicle charging stations. And this piece of legislation directs the Department of Housing to set up standards for installing charging stations in existing multifamily dwelling units. So in other words, condominium associations that have parking structures. What they're going to do is that if you need to pull a permit or do work in the parking structure, they may require that associations start installing the backbone for the systems, upgrading the electrical system, so that individual owners can then add a charging station to their parking spot. So we're going to see, this is part of the big push for electric vehicles. And I expect we're going to see more of this kind of legislation, where they're going to start forcing associations, condominium associations, to retrofit their facilities. So expect more information coming out on this as time goes on, and we'll be reporting this out as we learn more. This is SB 908, and it was passed in 2020, so 2 years ago, and created a great deal of confusion. And that was whether homeowner associations, condominium associations, whether they were required to become licensed debt collectors, because they're sending out past due notices, they're imposing late charges and interest, they're attempting to collect them, they're letting people know that they're delinquent. Those activities, those normal activities, finally we have some clarification on that, and that is from the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. And they decided this year that routine assessment collection activities do not require the association to be licensed. And that it's just common sense. Otherwise, it would be really problematic for homeowner associations just to do sending out routine notices. Now, collection agencies, of course, those have to be licensed, but not homeowner associations. Next one, dealing with lender questionnaires. This is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac sending out guidelines, lender guidelines, and this is following the collapse of Champlain Towers in Florida. And that collapse of that building sent shockwaves through the industry. The association had deferred maintenance, a significant amount of maintenance for years. It was 40 years old as a high rise. They'd had two separate reports from structural engineers telling them they needed to make repairs, and they kept delaying. And finally it became too late and the building collapsed. So now the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are requiring lenders to ask questions from homeowner associations before they will allow any loans to occur. And then they want to know about, is there deferred maintenance? Have there been building inspections? Are there any structural and safety issues? So those kinds of questionnaires are pretty intrusive, and they're problematic because they're difficult to answer without incurring potential liability for whoever is answering the questionnaire. And so a lot of associations have decided not to answer the questionnaires. And that has led to loans no longer being offered for units in the association. And others have, what they're doing is they're creating a letter to accompany it saying that they're saying that we can't answer with any specificity on a lot of these things. There's a lot of wiggle room in there on these questions, and those are being developed in concert with the law firms that represent the associations. And we're doing that with a number of our associations. We've developed a letter to go along with the answering of the questionnaire. So just, if you haven't run into this yet, you will. Okay, another reminder, and this is on the balcony inspections, that associations, condominium associations with balconies, that they need to be inspected by a structural engineer or an architect, and then repaired by a licensed contractor. The deadline is coming up. You've got 2 years left to get this done because it's due by January 1 of 2025. Now, the 2 years seems like a long time, but as you get closer and closer to that deadline, what's going to happen is the number of inspectors available to do the inspections, they will be swamped with work, and you may find that it's difficult to get somebody in, and the price may go up as well. Because as demand goes up and the number of inspectors is limited, they're going to start charging more to do these inspections. So we recommend that associations really start pursuing this now so that they can find, first of all, to get the inspection done, and then find out if there are any repairs that need to be done. So just a friendly reminder, please get this taken care of at the earliest opportunity. Okay, now into some unpublished cases. The first couple deal with architectural issues and ADR, an offer of alternative dispute resolution, which is required by the Davis-Sterling Act. And here we have an owner, Deal, whose house burned down. He dragged his feet on getting it rebuilt, kept dragging his feet. Association held hearings, made demands. He simply couldn't get it done or refused. And finally, they sued him. They went to court, and the court ordered him, interestingly enough, to complete the work within 90 days. He appealed. Went up to the Court of Appeal, and the issue on appeal, one of the main issues, was the HOA's failure to prove that it had served deal with a request for ADR. And as a result, the court overturned the lower court's decision. And where that's important to the association is two ways. One is that he no longer has an order to complete the work. So again, the house sits unfinished. But more importantly, the issue of attorney's fees. So as the prevailing party, Deal is entitled to his attorney's fees, and the association would be on the hook for those. Okay, the next one, Orange Crest v. Burns, also an unpublished case. And unpublished meaning that it can't be cited as legal authority. But what it does do is at least gives you an idea of how the courts would rule in a similar situation if you ended up in court. And here, Burns had sought architectural approval for a stucco wall in her front yard. And the architectural committee denied it. They said, no, you can't have a stucco wall. So what she did was she built a wall without stucco. And the association immediately issued a stop work order and offered ADR. Burns refused the ADR and finished the wall, and the association sued. So again, clear architectural violation and an offer of ADR. And in this case, the association prevailed, and the court ordered Burns to remove the wall. And when she appealed, she argued that she complied with the association by not building a stucco wall. Well, the court didn't like that argument in her reasoning, and the Court of Appeal upheld the lower court's decision. Okay, this is an interesting case, and it deals with a reasonable accommodation for someone who's disabled. And here the association had reports of criminal activity, and it exacerbated the plaintiff's anxiety. And she requested that a barbed wire fence be installed along the association's boundary to accommodate her disability. She supplied a doctor's note. She offered to pay for the fence, and the association refused. And Meyer sued. Well, you'd think that a chain link with barbed wire would automatically be turned down, except that the association already had chain link fences with 3-strand barbed wire. So if it had been 3-rail white fences, no chain link anywhere on the property, it may have turned out differently. But here the association had chain link and barbed wire, and she had offered to pay to install it and had a doctor's note saying that she really did have this disability. So what happened was the court ruled that in her favor, that the association should have installed a fence. So maybe there was another alternative solution, but here the association lost. Yeah, and we're going to see this happen again in the next case. So the lesson here is that you have to be really careful. I run into this myself in the courts, in that they bend over backwards to accommodate someone who's disabled. And so associations need to be careful that that bias exists in the court, and so that they need to take good, reasonable steps promptly to try and resolve the issue, the disability issue, and accommodate the disability. And we'll see it again here in the next one. In the Lakeview case, Salahi had sued because he wanted a parking space. It was behind the building. He had to walk around the front of the building. It was uneven walking area. It was difficult for him to do it. He was requesting a handicap parking space. And there were visitor parking spaces available in front of the building that they could have allowed him to use. But instead, the association demanded that he first receive membership approval, 67%, and then restripe the space at his own expense. Well, that did not go over well with the courts. And the association was arguing that this was common area, and therefore, under the Davis-Sterling Act, they had to go to the membership and get the membership's approval. But really, all they had to do was just swap out the spaces. And for some reason, they took this more draconian approach, and the judge disregarded the CC&Rs on this issue and ordered the association to provide the parking space without forcing the owner to pay for any extra striping. So had they just said, fine, your space in the back of the building, we're going to take over and it's going to become guest parking and you can use the space in front of the building. They didn't, and it was costly for the association. Okay, you can read these cases on our website. We've got them all posted, and all of the different legislation, the new laws that went into effect. So if you see the tab there that says new laws, if you click on it, it will take you to the section dealing with all the new laws, and you see that we have them by year. So you can go back to any year and see the legislation and cases that went into effect that year. And you can, as you can see there on the left-hand side, click on any of them and it will take you to that particular year. And then once you're in it, you can click on, for example, the bill AB 682, and it will take you directly to the bill, and you can read the bill in its entirety. Same thing with the cases. You scroll down and you can click on any of the cases and read the case. So if you want to do your own research, you want to read something in its entirety, we have everything posted so that you can do that. So I will turn this back to Netta. So thank you, Netta, for this opportunity.
Adam Sterling is California's premier law firm exclusively representing common interest developments. We provide general counsel and litigation services to a diverse portfolio of clients, including both homeowner and commercial associations. For the past 20 years, Adam Sterling has advised boards of directors in the effective governance of associations and advised on the implementation of strategic plans that reduce their liability risks. Adam Sterling is well known for its weekly newsletter and award-winning website, davissterling.com. The website and the newsletter reflect the firm's commitment to education and is the #1 relied upon reference for the interpretation of the Davis-Sterling Act.
Meet HOA Organizer's newest team member, Noah. Who is Noah? Noah is our expert trained to answer your questions 24/7 by text message. He's fast, reliable, and gets you answers immediately. Want to know your account balance or how to set up payments? Text Noah. Looking for an architectural application or governing documents? Text Noah. Wondering when the next board meeting is? Text Noah, anytime, day or night. For everything HOA, text Noah. HOA is in his name.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Metters, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for HOA Organizers, here to present your next segment. Netta Neharai is the founder and CEO of HOA Organizers, an award-winning and accredited full-service management company. Netta is a PCAM, which is the highest designation awarded to community managers. Because of her background as a community manager, she runs her business with the principles and values that are important to clients and employees. Education is at the forefront of Netta's passion. She truly thrives on empowering others through knowledge. The HOA Organizer staff are all afforded continuing education and certification opportunities, but it's also a passion of Netta's to educate board members to allow them to feel more confident in their volunteer roles. Netta has served on the Community Association Institute's Greater Los Angeles chapter as a board member for 3 years, concluding her 3rd year as the chapter's president in 2019. She also served as the chair of the CAI GLAC's program committee for 7 years, from 2015 through 2021. She has spoken at numerous industry events, including at the national conference with more than 2,000 people in attendance. She has also authored countless articles for industry magazines. Netta is the founder and producer of this very event, the ABCs of HOAs, and is proud to share the 10th year of this with all of you. This event allows her to deliver important information about timely topics to her clients, but also to board members across California. This is one of her many ways of giving back to the industry that she loves. Regina Carosi is a financial advisor with Edward Jones. She brings more than 25 years to the partnership as an executive, entrepreneur, and educator, having worked domestically and internationally with business owners, families, and individual investors to help them build wealth and protect their hard-earned assets using an established strategy and a long-term, diversified, quality investment philosophy. She has spent 15 years in finance in a number of senior executive roles, including serving as a corporate officer and senior vice president, with a focus on what's doing best for her clients. She enjoys educating her clients about investing. Having been an investor for more than 25 years, she particularly values working with women, especially helping those transitioning from a divorce or the loss of a spouse, helping them make sound decisions for their future. For more than a decade, she enjoyed giving back through teaching at several universities, including her alma mater, Pepperdine's Business School, where she earned her Master's of Business Administration degree in 2006. Derek Barrow is a CPA and serves as HOA Organizer's financial controller. Having graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a degree in business economics and having worked as a controller for a large multinational HOA management company, Derek brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to our team. Leading teams and standardizing controls is where Derek shines, and he works diligently overseeing the financial reporting for our communities. These three industry experts have put together an informative and timely presentation on financially guarding your association during economic downturns. Please welcome to the stage Netta Neharai, Regina Carosi, and Derek Barrow.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you again and share some insights about what is happening in the markets. It's no secret there's been a lot of conversation lately about the markets and the economy as a whole, with the news focusing quite a bit on the top headlines of market performance, inflation, and geopolitical challenges. Current events have sent the markets into a state of unpredictability. It's times like these that we see investors make decisions based on emotions fueled by news headlines, and often those decisions can derail their long-term goals. So on behalf of our clients, we are closely watching what's happening in the markets and are committed to serving and supporting individual investors through these uncertain times. So let's shed a little light on what's happening and what we can expect as we approach the new year. After a global shutdown in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the stock market finished 2020 with solid returns and recovered in historic fashion, and continued to set record highs in 2021 as well. So far, 2022 has been more turbulent. In fact, we moved into bear market territory in June. So what should you know about bear markets? Well, to begin with, a bear market occurs when a stock market index, such as the S&P 500, falls at least 20% from its most recent highs. Now, you might think this type of drop is rare, but actually that's not the case. Historically, bear markets have occurred every few years and are a very normal part of investing. This chart shows all the bull markets in green and the bear markets in red since 1946. As you can see, the bull markets are much more significant and last much longer than the bear markets. In fact, we experienced a bear market fairly recently from mid-February of 2020 through late March of that same year. In fact, it was the most abrupt bear market, but also the shortest bear market in history, lasting only 11 days, and was followed by historic highs in the stock market. So what causes a bear market? Well, each one is different, but the current one is largely the result of several factors, including high inflation, rising interest rates, the war in Ukraine, and global supply chain problems as a result of the pandemic shutdown. So when will it end? To understand that, we need to take a closer look at a few key factors. You know, it's easy to forget that during the COVID-19 pandemic, amid significant economic growth concerns, the Federal Reserve cut its key policy rate to near zero to help stimulate the economy. In 2022, the Fed decided to raise rates at a pace we have not seen since the 70s and 80s, with the aim of reducing demand and slowing the pace of inflation. Typically, the earlier part of the Fed's rate hiking cycle causes the most pain in the markets, with the latter parts of the hiking cycle being more positive. So if we look at 1983, for example, the Fed raised rates to stamp out inflation, but 24 months after the final rate hike in the cycle, markets were up almost 65%. So today, with the Fed having already raised rates at a historically fast pace, we think the end of this cycle is closer than the beginning. Now we're watching for three key developments that could indicate we've reached the market bottom. The first is inflation. It helps to know the causes of this recent inflationary spike. Essentially, it's a case of basic economics, strong demand for goods beating inadequate supply caused by material and labor shortages, along with shipping and delivery logjams. So in other words, too many dollars chasing too few goods. Inflation has been an overhang on markets all year, and the Fed has indicated it will raise rates until it sees clear and consistent evidence that inflation is dropping. So this is likely to mean 3 to 4 lower inflation readings. But the good news is that inflation is showing early signs of rolling over. It stands at 7.7% for the 12 months ending in October 2022, and that means a drop from 8.2% previously. Also looking at some key factors, the housing market, for example, is showing signs of a slowdown as well. Over time, these trends should be reflected in core CPI figures that we see here in this chart, which is starting to move in the right direction. Second, bond yields should stabilize and ultimately come down. Historically, yields tend to move higher until about 2 months ahead of the final Fed rate hike. And finally, the US dollar should soften. So let's look at labor. The US economy added 263,000 jobs in September and 261,000 in October, a sign that the US economy is very resilient. The unemployment rate rose slightly from 3.5% in September to 3.7% in October. Now, historically, unemployment tends to rise more than a year after the Fed's initial rate hikes. This highlights the lag that we often see between the Fed's actions and the time they take to filter through the economy. So from a historical perspective, the gap between the number of jobs and the number of unemployed people remains high, as we see in this chart. But this gap is starting to narrow. Now, unfortunately, unemployment would need to increase for the Fed to slow down their efforts of increasing rates. Now, although bear market declines are never comfortable, it's important to remember that the financial markets have shown great resilience over decades through wars, recessions, natural disasters, political crises, and other events as dramatic as what's going on now. Here's what the stock market has looked like since 1929. So even knowing this, bear markets have a knack of turning long-term investors into short-term traders. And we'd caution against making emotional decisions when it comes to your long-term financial goals. Some of the largest down days in the market often occur within close proximity to the largest up days. So that's why we often say that it's not about timing the market, but about time in the market that makes the difference long-term. So despite volatile markets over the past several months, we are likely still closer to the end of the Fed's rate hikes than the beginning. Markets in the Fed seem to converge towards a range of 5.0 to 5.3% for the peak federal funds rate. So we believe several leading economic and inflation indicators, including the yield curves and housing data, are showing early signs of softening. So this should translate to lower inflation for goods and services over time. Now, volatility may stick around as we move through what we hope is the final leg of the Fed tightening phase. We anticipate the Fed will downshift to a 50 basis point hike in December and likely a 25 basis point increase in early 2023, probably around March. Now, this can be a credible catalyst for a market rally, but if there are any disappointments in upcoming inflation readings, that may also be a catalyst for renewed market volatility. The good news for investors is that the period after the final Fed rate hike tends to be positive for markets. This chart highlights several periods of strong gains after the last Fed rate hike in the cycle. So historically, in the 12 months after the final Fed rate hike, the S&P 500 was up on average about 15%. Although the jury is still out on exactly how far the Fed will need to go to constrain inflation, we believe that we are closer to the end than the beginning. We expect inflation to trend downward over the coming months, shifting the market environment and easing some pressure from investment portfolios. So external events can have great influence on the markets, and today is no different. So even though bear markets are not fun when we're in them, it's important to focus on those things that we can control. For example, we can't control the market, but we can control our reaction to the market. First, be patient. It can be challenging to look at your investment statements during these days, but you'll help yourself by taking a long-term view. Remember that there have been 33 bear markets and 33 recoveries since 1900. That means that the stock market has recovered 100% of the time. Over a 25-year retirement, you could experience 6 to 7 bear markets on average. So market declines, while unpleasant, are in fact very normal. Review your risk tolerance. If you're having a hard time seeing your portfolio fluctuate, you may want to review your tolerance for risk and see if it's still the same as when you began investing. Even without a bear market, people's risk tolerance can change, especially as we approach retirement. A bear market is not meaningless, but by itself, it shouldn't cause you to change your long-term goals. And if your goals haven't changed, then your investment strategy shouldn't either. During a down market, look for opportunities. We think investors can use market volatility as an opportunity to rebalance their portfolios, diversify, and ultimately add quality investments at attractive prices. And finally, don't feel like you have to do this on your own. It can be useful to get some support and guidance as you try to navigate a downturn such as this one. In a recent survey, investors who work with a financial advisor, 84% said that doing so gave them a greater sense of comfort about their finances during the COVID-19 pandemic. So get some professional help. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. A bear market is never enjoyable, but taking the long view and making moves appropriate for your needs can help you get through this period and look ahead to better days. Staying patient, disciplined, and focused on your long-term goals is going to be critical.
Thank you, Regina. Welcome, everyone. My name is Derek Barrow. I am the financial controller for HOA organizers, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about fiduciary responsibility and what that means to you. Being a board member is never easy, even in the best of times. It can be even harder when there are things that are outside of your control. To Regina's earlier point, one of those things may be the current state of the economy. We have gone through tough times like this before, most recently back in 2008, when the economy was in a recession and we were seeing the negative impacts of the housing market and the HOA industry as a whole. But we made it through that time. That was a tough time, maybe even stronger and wiser than we were before. Even in these tough times, maybe more so in these situations, a board member has a fiduciary responsibility to their HOAs. That responsibility is to act with the utmost good faith and reasonable care for the benefit of the association and its members. Now I'd like to discuss some ways that you as a board member can exercise this fiduciary responsibility. So first is to properly budget for the upcoming year. Many of you have already completed your association's budgets for the upcoming year, assuming you're at 12/31 year end, but there are still things that you can do throughout the year and leading up to next year's budget. First, reference back to your financial statements, specifically the income statement. This document is important and will show you the individual line items for income and expenses. You can also see where you're at month to date and year to date for a given expense account, and if you're still in budget. If you're not in budget, first off, don't panic. Some expenses are not paid monthly, like insurance and tree trimming. These type of expenses may show up one month and not again for another few months or even for the rest of the whole year. For other expense accounts that may be over budget, monitor these accounts throughout the year. Understand the future expenditures still to come and how that may affect this year and what you need to do to budget for the following year. And lastly, be realistic. Not only about the cost of certain goods and services, but also about dues increases and special assessments. I know these are not popular decisions to have to make, but they can determine your ability to meet the future needs of your association. Now, earlier I had mentioned how the economy can have a negative impact on the housing market. So we need to be prepared for how this is going to affect our homeowners and your association. Some people may lose their jobs or experience financial hardships. This could lead to more homeowners falling behind on their monthly assessment payments or go into collections, and even some may have to sell or lose their homes. So as a board member, it is recommended for you to monitor your accounts receivable. Pay attention to your AR aging report that you get with your financial statements. This is an important document as well. Dive into the details. Look at the number of homeowners and their balances and see if they're increasing, decreasing, or staying steady on a month-to-month basis. This will tell you a lot about what's going on in your association. Also, make sure to record any liens and pre-liens in a timely fashion. This will secure your position in order of collection should the worst case scenario occur and a homeowner files for bankruptcy. Failure to record these in a timely manner may put you at the back of the line in the collections process. And finally, I'd like to talk to you about one additional way that you can exercise your fiduciary responsibility, and that is to discuss your options for investing. If you have an excess of funds, which I would describe as funds in excess of your upcoming and known expenses, you can invest these funds and begin earning interest income. This goes both for your operating and reserve funds. With interest rates on the rise, this is a signal from the banks and the Fed that they want you to be saving and investing your money. Typical investment vehicles for HOAs are money markets and CDs. Bonds have also started to become popular recently and are considered a conservative option similar to CDs. Money markets earn typically a lower interest rate, but allow you to freely move your monies if needed. CDs and bonds usually earn more interest, especially now. However, they do lock your money up for a predetermined amount of time. It is possible to sell these early if needed, but it may take time and there may be a cost to do so. So if you are interested and would like to discuss your options for your association for investing, I would encourage you to reach out to your financial controller. They will be able to help direct you so that you can have your money start earning that interest income for you. With that, I'd like to say thank you for choosing to spend some time with us here today, and I'll turn this over to Netta.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you, Derek. So we've heard from Regina and Derek about fiduciary responsibilities and what lies ahead, but that doesn't mean that there aren't actual tools that you can't use to basically protect your association. So I'm going to share a few tips that we have used with our clients, and I'm sure as board members, you can start to implement these and find some ways to combat the economic concerns. So in terms of revenue, we encourage you to think outside the box. You might have some newsletters that you produce for your association, or perhaps you don't, but maybe you can start to think about it. Depending on the size of your community, you might have some association vendors or some nearby local restaurants, or a plumber, a real estate agent who would be very interested in advertising in your newsletter. Nowadays, we distribute newsletters digitally, so the cost to the association is pretty nominal. So you can start to maybe charge $100 or $200 for a full page ad and allow some local vendors to benefit by participating in that. Derek talked a little bit about different investment accounts, but take a look at your interest. What is the interest that you're currently earning? Because interest rates are increasing right now, it's a good time for associations to start looking into what the interest rates are. And maybe you don't want to lock into a CD. You might want to invest in some money markets as interest rates continue to rise. But definitely look into that, because we don't want you missing out on higher interest for your reserve accounts. There were some unique ideas like kitchen rentals. Do you have a clubhouse or a kitchen on your premises? There are some third parties who are interested in using venues like associations and potentially catering to different groups. And so that might be a source of additional income or additional revenue. And be really mindful about your late fees. A lot of associations and board members tend to waive late fees, especially as homeowners have some delinquencies. But now is the time to really hunker down on those late fees and make sure that you protect the revenue stream. Other potential options here, there's filming opportunities. There are a number of websites out there that are pretty prominent, and we do work with quite a few associations who have their communities listed for filming. We can certainly provide the information to some really successful websites that our clients have used. And filming can produce maybe $5,000 to $10,000 of additional revenue per day. If you have a unique site, if you have a lot of space, this might be something that you'd want to consider. Vending machines are another option, especially if you have a clubhouse. There are companies who will supply the vending machines, who will actually stock the vending machines. So the trouble of doing all of that is out of your hands, but those companies will revenue share with you, especially if you're in a community that might be a little off the beaten path. Residents, guests, and people just might want and appreciate the convenience of having those vending machines available. Now, cell towers can be a little adversarial in terms of the topic. There are some homeowners who are very concerned about cell towers, rightfully so, but there are companies out there that want to use associations' properties, rooftops, or again, you have a large laid out community. Cell towers might be an option, but do make sure you poll your homeowners, because it's always a polarizing topic, and make sure you do your research about the safety. And there's increasing fees. So you have parking, you have clubhouse, you have all sorts of little fees like laundry income and revenue as well. And while I know it's not a popular topic or something that we want to do, the truth is prices around us are all increasing. So as an association and a board, it's also time to consider increasing your fees to your homeowners and residents who use different amenities that you charge for. Now, in terms of expenses, there are a number of things that you can do to help keep your expenses as low as possible. So insurance is a very big topic. First and foremost, take a look at your insurance deductibles. If you have, say, a $1,000 deductible or maybe a $2,500 deductible, it might be time to talk to your agent to get some quotes for higher deductibles. Now, this serves multiple purposes. One, we don't want to encourage frivolous claims. If you have claims that are being submitted for $2,000 or maybe $3,000, that's going to hurt your loss history and ultimately hurt your premiums in the future. But additionally, if you go with slightly higher deductibles, not only are you minimizing the frivolous claims, you're also going to be potentially decreasing your premiums. Also, look at your insurance claims. Again, it's really important to be selective with what you allow to be put forward in terms of an insurance claim. The more claims on your history, the more likely it is for carriers to not want to insure you or to look at you as a high-risk client. They're going to consider increasing premiums significantly. And we've seen several cases where certain carriers, prime carriers, will actually refuse to work with your clients until the loss history cleans up. And there's insurance bulk pricing. So for HOA organizers clients, for example, we're able to provide bulk pricing because of the volume of clients who work with certain agents that we work with. So that's another thing, get in touch with your management company and see if they have a relationship with any insurance agencies who specialize in homeowners associations who can provide the benefit of bulk pricing to you. Now, separate from the insurance topic, we, again, at HOA Organizers, we do facilitate a lot of digital communication. We're in a day and age where technology is really prominent, and we definitely take advantage of the technological options. So we minimize a lot of the paper communication, and we do actively scan and email things to homeowners, to our board members, email blast our homeowners. And so not only does that help with rapid communication and transference of information, but it also helps with costs because we are not paying postage and copies. Some other tips. This does take a little bit of work, but plumbing inspections for condominium complexes have been very successful. Now, associations that pay for water really have to look at how you can conserve your water expenses. So the plumbing inspections really are important for that. Oftentimes, homeowners don't even realize that they have a leaking valve or a running toilet. These things can waste hundreds of gallons per unit per day. And we know with different utility companies, they offer tiered pricing. So when you move and start to move into higher tiers of water usage, you start to pay higher prices. So periodically, I'd say maybe every year, every 2 years, it's a good idea to have a plumber come in and take a look at every unit and the components and just create a list for the association in terms of what might be leaking or what might need to be fixed. And that way you can help prevent the leaks and stop the waste of water. There are utility audits. There's a company that we work with in particular who will actually go back and take a look at utility charges for you. And they'll look to make sure that you're using the right tiers and the right pricing, that the utility companies are charging the correct amounts. Now, the benefit to working with a company like this is that they don't charge for their services. They only charge if they find something wrong, and they're going to be requesting a credit back to the association, and they'll take a percentage of that credit back. So there's really nothing to lose in these situations. There's also utility rebates available. Now, there's a variety of utility companies out there, but in my research, there's literally just about any utility company out there, and most of them are offering for single family homes turf rebates. For example, the LADWP is offering up to $25,000 to replace your turf with drought tolerant materials. There's also a resource for Southern California, bewaterwise.com. And what you can do is go on that website and take a look at literally for San Diego County, Inland Empire, Ventura County, Los Angeles County, Orange County. They do cover all of the rebates that they have available separate from your utility companies. So do take a look at that. It's interesting. You don't really think about the rebates and what you might be able to do when you do, for example, retrofit some lights within the community. You're going to be saving on electricity costs in the future, but you might also be able to get some of the cost refunded back to you through rebates available. So that's the benefit and the beauty. In the future, you'll save when you convert your components within the community, but you also might get some of the cost, if not all of the cost, covered by the rebates that are available. And negotiate. Don't be afraid to go back to vendors who've increased their prices and ask them if they can sharpen their pencil and help a little bit. Especially right now, we know that, again, prices have been increasing across the board, but maybe next year there's an opportunity to revisit that with your vendors and to ask them to reconsider pricing or adjust some pricing as times change. Well, we want to thank you so much today for sharing your time with us. Our contact information is provided on this slide, our email addresses. And if you have any specific questions for Regina, Derek, or myself, please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I'd like to introduce, first and foremost, Steve Tinley, who's the managing partner of Tinley Law and president of Altera Assessment Recovery, LLC. Steve has been a speaker at the ABCs of HOAs before, and I'm excited to welcome him back. Steve is the managing partner of Tinley Law Group. Prior to joining the firm, Mr. Tinley worked in the litigation departments of mid-size and multinational corporate law firms. He is known for his exceptional writing, analytical and negotiation skills, and providing general counsel representation to many of the firm's larger HOA clients throughout the state of California. Mr. Tinley also manages the firm's overall operations. He has a passion for improving the firm's efficiencies, increasing its resources, and expanding upon the value of the firm provides to every client. Mr. Tinley's undergraduate education was received at the University of Southern California, where he graduated cum laude with a Bachelor of Science in Business Entrepreneurship and a minor in law and society. He obtained his Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Los Angeles, where he focused on corporate and real estate law. He is an active member of the community association industry and devotes a substantial amount of time to educating homeowners and industry professionals about the legal issues affecting California community associations. I'm excited to welcome Steve. I would also like to introduce Christine Taylor, who is a community association manager with HOA organizers. She maintains her AMS designation and has been with HOA organizers for almost 10 years. Additionally, she is a real estate professional with more than 2 decades experience. Christine's client base of buyers and sellers in her real estate profession comprise of everyone from first-time buyers to business executives and world-class athletes, and each of them enjoys the same impeccable service, just as our clients at HOA organizers do from Christine. From Taylor's thorough understanding of market trends and inventory to her marketing and negotiation skills, to her availability and attention every step of the way, Christine has set herself apart as a true star in the real estate industry and as a community association manager. Christine has been a top and consistent producer throughout her career, earning numerous sales awards and honors, as well as recognition by her peers. She spent 10 years in the upper ranks of sales productions for Coldwell Banker Brentwood East before joining Gibson International during its 2008 launch to work alongside other leading agents seeking a boutique-style, service-oriented approach. Christine now represents the Compass brand in Los Angeles, leveraging its powerful marketing resources and expanded professional network to achieve an even greater level of personalization, service, and satisfaction for her clients. Steve and Christine are going to be talking to us today about the real estate market and collections forecasting. We know there's some big things ahead, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve to take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Netta. Our program that we're going to be speaking to you about now is on the state of the housing market and housing price trends and how that's going to impact your communities moving forward in terms of collections. So I'm Steve Tinley. I'm the managing partner of Tinley Law Group. We're an HOA law firm. And I'm lucky to have with me the fabulous Christine Taylor, who is a real estate professional and also works in our industry as well, who's going to give us some insight on what we're seeing in terms of housing market, housing price trends. And then we'll talk about how they may impact your communities and how to plan ahead for them. So, Christine, I'll turn it to you. What do you have for us?
Oh, thank you, Steve, for the introduction. Again, I'm Christine Taylor. I'm a real estate agent with Compass in Los Angeles. I am here to present a brief report regarding housing market. The information obtained is from the Burns U.S. Housing Forecast in October. The Burns report is saying, first of all, for new homes, the most likely scenario is for single family new home permits will fall by 19% in 2023. Periods of rate increases are also typically followed by periods of recession, and builders will be reluctant to start projects that may come onto the market during a recession. Regarding resale market, resale sales are forecasted to fall by 16% in 2023 to a total closed sales of 4.2 million. Despite demographic trade winds, 6% interest rates will discourage buying for some households and will price families out of buying a home. So that's the projections for 2023. The next slide, if you would, Steve. The key assumption for annual average 30-year fixed rate mortgages are ranging between 5.1% in 2023 to 6.3% in 2023, which is a substantial increase from last year, as you can imagine. The next slide, if you would, Steve. U.S. existing home sale closings. The Burns report forecasts existing home sales will fall by 16% year over year in 2023 due to rising mortgage rates, cooling demand, and a slowing economy, which will hit consumer confidence. We'll go to the next slide if you'd be so kind. The one thing that's going up, though, is U.S. single-family rent growth. The Burns report is forecasting single-family rents will grow by 2% in 2023, 3% in 2024, and 4% in 2025. That is the increase in the monthly amount that a person will pay for rent. And lastly, in regards to the update, the key points that lenders consider when it comes to HOAs is number one, standard guidelines from lenders require that HOAs have 51% or greater of owner occupancy versus rentals. And if a HOA has 70% owner occupancy, it streamlines the loan for lenders, and they do not require to review the budget or CC&Rs. Some other factors that also affect lender review of HOAs when it comes to financing is if any individual owns more than 10% of the total number of properties in a HOA, and it's 21 units or more, that can affect the possibility of getting a loan in that HOA. Also, if HOA dues are in the rears, no more than 15% of total HOA members can be delinquent in their HOA dues. This all can affect buyers who want to buy in the HOAs. Annual HOA budget should include a line item for reserves. Very important point. If you don't have a reserve on your budget, that can affect a buyer being able to get financing. Also, litigation in HOAs can also affect a buyer regarding financing. So these are some important points to consider. Steve, you want to go ahead in regards to collections and the role?
Yeah, thank you for that, Christine. That's super helpful, kind of giving us that backstory. So, we have to plan financially in terms of, how to protect our communities, how to keep our property values at or above where where they currently are, and just in generally managing the affairs of the association. And it always kind of touches on the unsavory topic of HOA collections, especially when we're at fear of, maybe entertaining or entering into an economic downturn. I remember I was having a bunch of these types of seminars at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's concerns. Boards have concern. Okay, well, our costs are increasing just because of, the inflation and minimum wage increases. And then at the same time, now we have, interest rate increases, and with an economic slowdown, we might start feeling a cash flow pinch. What should we as board members really do in terms of making sure we're doing our job to set our association to be in the most financially stable position that we can? And before you answer that question, I always kind of like to take a step back and give really a bird's eye view so that we understand what the real role of an HOA is, right? We are nonprofit corporations with a zero-based budget. We are not for-profit lenders or financial institutions. We don't make money. We, every dollar that we assess is tied to an expense, right? That's on our budget that we have to perform. And because of that, we are actually required, when I say we associations, to levy assessments in amounts sufficient to perform our obligations. So as inflation hits and costs of labor and materials keep going up, costs of professional service providers keep going up, so too must assessments. And when you juxtapose that with a potentially softening economic climate, that could present a real concern, and it could result in an increased delinquency rate within your community. So how do you deal with that? Well, first, understand this. There is no legal defense or justification for an owner's non-payment of assessments. So if you think in California, there's literally no defense I can say whatsoever. If I'm not paying my HOA dues, I cannot say, well, I don't use the pool, or I don't like the, how the landscape is being maintained. None of those, right? You have to pay assessments. And why is that? Because assessments are the lifeblood of our nonprofit corporations. We are not in the business to make money. We do not have other sources of revenue that we can use to pay our bills. It has to come directly from our members. So when someone is not paying assessments, what does that mean? That means that we have to reduce services or defer maintenance, or the rest of the homeowners have to pay more in subsidizing the people who aren't paying. The legislature doesn't want that. So they give us as associations very significant remedies in recovering from a non-paying homeowner. We can charge late charges, we can charge interest, any collection fees that the association incurs through management or through its collection attorney or collection company, those actually get added onto the homeowner's debt and are recovered from the homeowner as well. So the association is made whole. We can record assessment liens on properties, which this is the most important thing that your association should be doing. If people owe money, you follow your collection policy and you secure that debt by recording a lien against the unit. And that's an encumbrance. And Christine knows this well, right? You can't close escrow. You can't, transfer clean title to a new purchaser unless that lien is released. And how does that lien get released? Because the association has to be paid off, and it's typically done through escrow in that scenario. And then when you have homeowners that still aren't paying assessments, even after a lien's been recorded, we can actually enforce that lien through foreclosure. HOAs have the same non-judicial foreclosure power as mortgage lenders do, as well as through lawsuits. If you're working with a firm that likes to file lawsuits to collect assessment debt, our firm doesn't prefer that. We like the non-judicial approach. But there's a variety of remedies that are there. And that's what's really important for you as a board to understand. The legislature knows that we need every penny from every person paid in a timely fashion. And when people aren't paying, we have very, very significant weapons that we can wield. We can start foreclosure on as little as an $1,800 assessment debt or a year assessment debt. So think about that, how significant that remedy is. So if your community, you're dealing with a situation, hey, Steve, Christine, the economy is softening. People are not making as much anymore. It's a difficult thing. We have some homeowners that are delinquent in the payment of assessments that have never been delinquent. What can we do to help them out, right? Well, these are some of the things that you can consider. You can waive late fees and interest. Those are soft costs, right? Those are not money that your association was expected to have when you did your budgeting process, but that's only on a case-by-case basis. I had one client at the beginning of the pandemic that wanted to send a letter out to the entire community saying, just so to help everybody out, we're not going to charge late fees and interest. And I said, well, all you're doing is creating an incentive for people not to pay because it's basically a free loan from your community. So don't do that. You can ease your payment plan standard as well, right? So we have the ability to allow homeowners to enter into payment plans, right, where we will not pursue any more collection actions while they're on the payment plan. So you can ease those standards a little bit, but keep them reasonable because again, your association should not be a source of credit. So if you're going to use a payment plan, have it be a 1-year term or a 2-year term tops. I don't think you're doing your community or your membership a service by allowing homeowners to enter into 10-year payment plans, where it's basically a 10-year interest-free loans on the back of the rest of the community. That's not a good idea. And also too, if your association has a bunch of collections and you're in a cash flow pinch, sometimes it's nice just to welcome lump sum settlement offers. So if you have a homeowner that owes, let's say $8,500 and they're saying, listen, the most I can pay is $7,000. If you're in a cash flow pinch, you might say, okay, well, let's just do that in order to get that money in the door. All right, these are actions that you can consider if your association finds itself with a bunch of collection challenges and you want to do something to try to help homeowners out. But what should you not do? You should not waive assessments. Legally, you can't waive assessments. The board doesn't have the authority to do that. We have a duty to collect assessments that we levy that are sufficient to perform our obligations. Not recording liens. I've seen some communities do that. Hey, we don't want to do that. We're just going to leave it on the account. But then all of a sudden the property changes hands and the assessment debt that was the prior homeowner does not automatically pass to the new homeowner. So now the association's out that money. They're going to have to find the old homeowner and probably sue them in order to recover. Creating disincentives to pay on time. That's an example I gave with that community that sent out a letter that says, don't worry about late charges and interest. We're going to put a halt on that. Don't do that. That'll just make more people not pay timely that could pay, but decide not to because they say, well, what's the harm? If I don't pay, it's not like the association is going to charge me any late charges or interest. Foregoing collections altogether, I think that's a breach of duty. That's a bad idea. And also too, deferring maintenance and improperly funding reserves. This is, we work with about 1,400 communities all throughout the state, condo projects, large single family home, everybody under the sun. The communities that we see that tend to find themselves in significant financial trouble are those which have not been assessing properly as their community needs have gone on. As costs have increased, they haven't raised assessments whatsoever because their boards have thought that their number one duty is to keep dues low. And that's really not the duty of an HOA board of directors. Your duty is to maintain assets. And depending on the size of your community and where you are, you may be making decisions that impact tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate assets. So the diligence that you have in making sure that those assets are properly maintained, that is what's going to protect and promote property values, not keeping your assessments artificially low, either by improperly funding reserves or deferring maintenance. Those communities that do that inevitably find themselves in that nightmare scenario where a notice is sent out saying we have to levy an emergency assessment for $20,000 per unit because our buildings are crumbling, or it's red tagged. We've seen a number of those situations, unfortunately. So understand this. It's, as we're feeling the cash flow pinch, we're feeling inflation. We might be entering, more and more softening of the economy. The last thing that we should do is look to cut corners in terms of maintaining our assets in our community association. We can all manage our budgets personally, but when it comes to the community, we have to make sure that we're doing what we need to do, that we're following the advice of our experts. The last topic that we're going to touch on real quick is something that's really interesting to us in the legal field, in the HOA environment, because there's been a number of new bills, new laws that have come into effect over the course of the last few years that the legislature has enacted as part of California's housing policy, right? Where housing is too expensive, there's not enough of it, costs too much to live in California, and judging by the Burns report that Christine went over, it seems like that problem is going to compound itself. So what is the legislature trying to do? Well, they're doing a number of things. One, they've really limited the types of rental restrictions that HOAs can adopt. More latitude now to build accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, bills that have basically broke down single family zoning that allow multiple families to live in the same units, and then limiting our regulation. What's the big picture here? The legislature wants, in order to deal with the housing crisis, more density. So where you might have a community where each home was expected to have only one household living in it, under the current state of the law, you could have a situation now where you have that household living in it, and there might be another household living in the ADU on the property, or there might be separate tenants renting out each individual room. So instead of one household, you might have two households or three households or four households. Are they all members? Do we all get to assess them? We don't know those things. So if if we're doing our budget and planning and say, okay, our pool costs this much to maintain per year, but that's based on, we're a 100-unit community, 100 households. As we move forward here, that construct is going to change. We might go up to 120 households. So what does that mean in terms of our parking availability? What does that mean in terms of, can we assess these homeowners or these occupants rather that don't own the home, but that live there with the homeowner? Can they pay an associate membership fee or something like that if they want to use the pool? These are all unsettled questions that are going around the legal industry and with groups of HOA attorneys who really don't know the answer right now. But we just wanted to leave you with this teaser to understand that the idea of typical HOA living is in flux, and we are going to have more and more density, more and more urban infill projects. So as we're making our financial planning and preparing our budgets and doing those things, these are some of the ideas that we need to keep in mind. And for those of you, I have some clients that are already dealing with a number of accessory dwelling unit and junior accessory dwelling unit issues. They've started developing junior associate or junior membership fees, rather, where you have the homeowner that pays the assessment, and then the tenant that lives with the homeowner pays a smaller assessment in order for the tenant to be able to use the pool at the same time the owner is. That's just one example of how, working with your management professionals, talking with your legal counsel, and making your financial planning decisions. Keep in mind that, as the composition of your membership changes and the composition of your community changes, it's going to impact you from a financial standpoint, and you need to start planning for that and get ahead of it. Well, that's all the time we have. Quick program there. Christine, thanks so much for the insight at the beginning. We hope to give you guys some guidance on things to keep in mind as you're making these important budget decisions for your community. Anything else you want to add, Christine?
No, Steve, that was all very interesting information and very helpful. But thank you for the time and opportunity.
All right, great. Thanks so much. We'll turn it back to Netta.
Next, I'd like to welcome Craig Lee Huntington. Craig is a senior managing director at Alliance Association Bank, which is the bank of choice for our HOA organizers clients. He has been an integral part of the team since its inception in 2008. In addition to managing the needs of clients located in the West region, Mr. Huntington plays an essential role in developing Alliance Association Bank's community management program. His efforts drive the creation of new products and technologies that bring additional benefits to clients. Previously, Huntington worked as an analyst and underwriter with Western Alliance Bank's corporate finance group. And prior to that, he held positions at First National Bank of Arizona and Mutual of Omaha. Mr. Huntington volunteers as the executive director of the American Legion Nevada Boys State Conference, and he spends 1 week each year volunteering with high school students. He is a graduate of Georgetown University and currently resides in Los Angeles, California. I'd also like to introduce Shauna Gatlin, who is Vice President of Organizational Advancement with HOA Organizers. Shauna brings over 15 years of community association management experience to our team, and she joined our team recently. As our Vice President of Organizational Advancement, she drives our innovation and new processes to ensure that our team is set up for success. Shauna began her career in 2007, where she spent 7 years in portfolio and large master planned communities. In 2013, she was recognized for her superior service and talent and moved into various leadership roles. Her primary objective is to maintain close client relationships, provide exceptional service, and always do what's right for the properties that she manages. She brings an astute knowledge and background of the Los Angeles area. She was born and raised in Los Angeles and now proudly raises her own family in Santa Clarita. Shauna has her CMCA certification and is an active member of Community Association Institute, where she sits on the education and college curriculum committees. In fact, the Education Committee just won the Committee of the Year back in November. Shauna is an involved community member, once receiving special recognition from the County of Los Angeles's Board of Supervisors for her valuable work at a master plan community. Craig and Shauna are going to be talking to us about loans and special assessments, a topic that is very important to our communities. Thank you both, and I look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Netta, for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. Good morning. As Netta mentioned, we are going to be talking about loans and special assessments. Not everyone's favorite subject matter, but we have an expert on our hands who's going to walk us through this process, hopefully simplify it and get your questions answered. My name is Shauna Gatlin. I am the Vice President of Organizational Advancement here at HOA Organizers, and with me is Craig Lee Huntington. Craig, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. Good morning. It's great to be here with the team at HOA Organizers and all of you on the camera and video today. So I'm Craig Huntington with Alliance Association Bank. I've been with the company for 15 years. It's actually one of the founding members of our division here. And we've been banking homeowners associations ever since, and really pride ourselves on providing great solutions both on the deposit side and on the loan side for community associations.
Thank you. We are so happy to have you here. So we know this is never an easy topic, and it can be really overwhelming for boards. For associations that are not 100% funded or have the problem of having to, or don't have the problem of having too much money, borrowing can be a really great alternative to avoid further delaying important reserve projects, mandated seismic retrofits, or capital improvement projects that cost more than 5% of the current fiscal year's budgeted gross expenses. Why do I mention 5%? That is what the boards are allowed to special assess the membership without a vote of the membership. That statute is found in Civil Code Section 5605, subsection B. So remember, the 5% number, 5% is the magic number. And if you go over that, this is an option you may want to explore. So Craig, can you talk to everyone about why borrowing can make a lot of sense for HOAs?
Yeah, absolutely, Shauna. And you're over here, quoting state statutes, making me a little insecure now. But that's fabulous that you're so well versed in this. But yeah, I think the main reasons to look at borrowing are because you're doing major capital improvement projects for the association. You need to repair your roof, put on new siding, or you're responding to some of the recent requirements here in the state of California. SB 326, the new deck law, is requiring some condo associations to take some additional steps. Or here in Los Angeles County, having to do earthquake retrofitting for the association. So any big expenses that the association has on the horizon that they just haven't sufficiently reserved for, lending is a great option. And then the other piece of it is it does give the flexibility to allow the homeowners to spread that expense over time. You could always do a single special assessment, but that can be really tough for a lot of homeowners within your communities. So providing a loan can amortize those expenses out over 5 or 10 years, sometimes even 15 years. So, really great options for the association.
Excellent. Now, prior to the loan, what should a board consider?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of key things to consider. One is, would it be best to special assess one big lump sum or actually do a loan? And I think the best way to determine that question or get the answer to that question is surveying your homeowners. Like, I think reaching out to the membership is always the first step that I encourage associations to look for. And then oftentimes you might be able to have fund from a different reserve category. So depending on the nature of the expense, you may have some savings in the community that can be reallocated to an expense. But getting to know what the community needs and talking to the homeowners is really the most important thing, I think, in my mind. And then you can also look at deferring the project in some cases, increasing your normal assessment over time before you go into the lending option. I always tend to encourage associations, even though, sometimes I talk HOAs out of using a product that we offer, but a loan should really be one of the last options that an association considers, because there's just oftentimes alternatives that might suit the situation a bit better.
Absolutely. And I want to reiterate again, surveying the members and engaging the members early on in the process, I think is absolutely vital. If the HOA does ultimately end up borrowing, having them be a part of the process at the very beginning when you're initially looking into it really helps with the buy-in, especially if you need to get a vote of the membership. And I wanted to touch a little bit about special assessments right now. There are two types of special assessments. There is an emergency special assessment, and then there is a traditional special assessment, which again goes when anything is over that 5% number. The approval requirement is set by the statute. It's not set by the governing documents. Regardless of anything contrary in your governing documents, special assessments are approved by a majority of a quorum of the membership. And the Davis-Sterling Act defines a quorum to mean more than 50% of the owners of an association. So that's in Civil Code Section 5605, subsection C. It then defines a majority of a quorum to mean the affirmative vote of a majority of the votes cast, which votes also constitute a majority of the required quorum. So what does that mean? An affirmative vote means a yes vote. So you need to have a majority of a quorum to mean affirmative vote. You need yes votes. This is tough to do. So engaging those members early on, getting a sense of what they want, if they're okay with this project, and educating them, really sending out informational letters, educational newsletters, getting the word out on why the association needs to do whatever project that is. Like Craig mentioned, the SB 326 balcony bill project, a mandated earthquake retrofit project, or something that the community just needs for their overall property values. Now let's talk emergency. Most boards want to go to an emergency special assessment because it's easier. You don't have to get a vote of the members. But I want to just quickly define what that emergency special assessment means. How does the law define it? Number one, it can be an extraordinary expense that's required by a court order. Number two, an extraordinary expense necessary to repair or maintain the common interest development or any part of it, for which the association is responsible where a threat to personal safety on the property is discovered. So that's where there's a threat to personal safety is the important one for that item. Or number three, an extraordinary expense necessary to repair or maintain the common interest development or any part of it for which the association is responsible that could not have been reasonably foreseen by the board in preparing and distributing the annual budget report. So this means something that you could not have foreseen. And that's tough because if it's, a project that is on your reserve study that you've been aware of for many years, coming due and having less and less of a useful life, it's hard to say you couldn't reasonably foresee that. However, before anyone can impose or collect on an emergency special assessment, you need to pass a resolution, a formal board resolution containing written findings on the necessity of the extraordinary expense, why the expense could not have been reasonably foreseen, and it must be distributed to all of the members. Now, I don't think that the manager or the board should write this resolution. I highly recommend you engage the association's legal counsel to do that. It just makes sense and it helps make it very clean. Now, Craig, can you walk us through some of the basics of HOA borrowing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so your association's gone through the steps that me and Shauna had kind of outlined and have decided that you do want to do a loan. I think it's good to have some of the, the general terms understood. And so, the borrower in this case is always going to be the homeowners association. And then the collateral for the loan is actually the assessments that the association pays. So typically speaking, that's the special assessment that you pass. And so it's really important to note that, there's not a lien or a mortgage that's placed on the individual unit. So it's actually a loan to the association collateralized by the cash flow of the association. And then that means that the association is responsible for the monthly payments. So as board members, you'll typically sort of individualize this loan in the sense that you may have some members that participate in it or some that don't. So each individual homeowner is paying their portion of the loan, but it's actually the association that's doing the loan and providing the cash flow for those payments. And then I think it's important to note that there are no personal guarantees required of any of the board members. I was talking to an association probably 2 or 3 years ago, and they had done they were working through an HOA loan with a bank that didn't specialize in it. And they came to the final loan documents. As they're signing the loan documents, the bank was expecting each of the board members to provide a personal guarantee for the loan, which, obviously is something that you would never want to do. And so, working with a specialized bank is important, and there won't be any of those personal guarantees.
Absolutely. I think that's really important because that is usually one of the first questions a board member that hasn't ever engaged in this process is worried about, is that they don't want their name, social security number, or themselves to be on the hook. So I completely agree. So now if the board has surveyed the members, they are ready to go, they want to borrow some money, who has the authority to actually do this? I know it's the board, but can you go into some more detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, a very important step. So like the first 2 steps here, determining how much you need and that you have the authority to borrow. And so, that can vary by association. So the very first thing that you want to do if you're going to proceed with a loan is to review the association's governing documents. And, we always recommend that you reach out to your attorney in this stage because they can review the governing documents, see the correlations or the associations with the Davis-Sterling Act here in California, and make sure that the association has the ability to borrow. You may need to get a vote of the general membership. I've seen cases where you may even have to update the bylaws of the association. And then once you've determined that structure, then you can follow those steps to make sure that you've got the authority to borrow the funds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll repeat this a little bit. Number one, get your attorney involved in this stage. I think if you walk away with anything during this segment, that's number one, is that don't try and do this without your association's legal counsel. It just makes things really clean. And the governing documents are the ones who decide this. So make sure you engage legal counsel, check your governing documents. Like we talked about with the special assessment earlier and going out to the vote of the membership, the ballot may require that you not only ask the members, can we special assess you via this loan, but it's also going to say, can we take out this loan? So there's going to be multiple questions on that ballot, potentially asking the members if they agree to what the board has in store for them. So it's really important that all of that lines up, and it's definitely, you're doing this in accordance with your governing documents. So that's really important to set the stage so you can have a great project and be able to get the loan. So let's talk about payments now. How does the HOA pay the loan back?
Yeah, so there are really 2 sort of primary options here, and the structure that we recommend combines them both. But when you're doing a loan, we recommend that you give the homeowners the option to participate in the loan or not participate in the loan. So, hypothetically speaking, let's say you've got a $10,000 special assessment, that would be the lump sum payment. You could give the homeowners the option to pay that $10,000 up front, or if they don't want to pay the $10,000 up front, they can participate in a payment plan that the association would structure that correlates to the term of the loan. So let's say you did a 5-year loan, you would then structure those payments over the next 5 years for those homeowners. And so this is a great way so that if homeowners, have the cash on hand, or they have, equity in their home that they'd rather pull out to use and pay the special assessment, they can do that all up at once, or they can pay it out over a long period of time. And then most typically speaking, when a unit sells that has participated in the payment plan, they would pay out the remaining balance of that special assessment. So if you had somebody participating in a 5-year repayment plan, they sold their condo 2 years into that payment plan, they would pay out the remaining balance at that time when they sell the unit. So the special assessment payment plan does not transfer to the new unit owner. And then what's important about this structure is that you want to make sure that there's no prepayment penalty in your loan. And so again, this is why it's really important to work with a bank that is specialized in the HOA payment space. But a prepayment penalty ensures, or making sure that there's no prepayment penalty ensures that homeowners can pay off that special assessment earlier in the process. It also means that you can take down the full loan prior to collecting the upfront payments. So to go back to our $10,000 example here, we'll just say we've got a really small HOA. It's got 20 units. I shouldn't say really small, but an HOA that's got 20 units. So they have a $200,000 project. They could do a loan for $200,000, borrow that loan, and then let's say eight homeowners pay $10,000. They could then pay off $80,000 of the $200,000 loan and have a $120,000 loan remaining for the next 12 homeowners. And so ensuring there's no prepayment penalty there ensures that there's no challenges or expenses that the association would see. And so whenever you're getting your term sheet or reviewing loan documents, I always encourage the association board to make sure that there's no prepayment penalty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for board members, this is what kind of is the hang up with homeowners when they're looking at that ballot on whether to say yes or no. So having all of these details in like some kind of an educational letter or newsletter to homeowners prior to them receiving the ballot and making the decision on whether they agree that the association can engage with a loan and the special assessment is to let them know that there are these options for them where they can pay in full, they can pay over time, and that there's no prepayment penalty. That's on everybody's mind the minute they get those scary documents that say the association has to do this big project and you're on the hook for a good portion of it.
Yeah. And you should take credit for it as a board member too. I always encourage board members to, Shauna's point, the homeowners are scared or concerned when they get that notice in the mail, but you say, look you've got such a great board of directors that we realize that we have this problem. We've got to replace the roofs. It's going to cost $2 million. You can pay all that up front, or because your board of directors is so great, we also found the second option for you where you can participate in this loan and amortize that out over a 10 or 15-year period of time. And so, you should take some credit as the board and the solutions that you're providing to the association. And I think that makes the homeowners feel better about it too, because oftentimes these special assessments are not something that somebody's looking forward to, and knowing they've got that option that you put together is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So now we've talked about payments. What about, how does the board decide? Should they do the full amount of a project? Should they do a part of the amount? How do they decide how much the loan should be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so, you've determined you could borrow, you kind of determine the payment structure. We always recommend that you do a full project at once. And so occasionally I'll run into associations that want to do sort of a portion of a project or, improve the quality of their community, but they're only doing maybe 60% of the total projects they might foresee over the next year or 2 years. And I always recommend that you should do the entire project and any major projects that you have coming up over the next year or two to make sure that your process is easier. If you're doing a single vote instead of 2 or 3 votes, you're doing a single special assessment instead of 2 or 3 special assessments, and really get the community back on good footing. This will also be important to the bank. Banks are going to be hesitant to provide a loan to an association where the association isn't, sort of having a good long-term plan and understands what additional reserve expenses or major projects they may have coming up. Another way to think about this is if you're going into the loan, you want to make sure that you're really enhancing the value of your community. And so let's say you've got a community that needs a new roof and then they need new siding, but they need the new siding in the next 18 months. Combining those 2 projects will really simplify everything for the association, but also really enhance the property value of the community. And that's important that the lender sees that, because that is important to the credit worthiness of the association. The other thing that I think is important to remember is that you should include some contingency amounts in your loan. Especially over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of associations see increased expenses as they go through the project because of supply chain issues or inflation costs. And so keeping that in mind when you're doing your loan amount is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Inflation is something on everybody's mind these days, and those supply chain issues and costs just going up, up, up. So now the next big question, and I think this is what really stops people from moving forward, is the unknown around what is the loan process? How does an HOA be a good candidate to get the loan, to be approved for a loan? We know as individuals, we need a high credit score, but what does an HOA do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll jump into the loan process and sort of the credit worthiness that we look at associations. The first thing though that I always say is if you're on a board of directors that has a management company, really engage your manager. And if you're a self-managed HOA, I don't know if we have many of those on the line today here, but I feel for you. I'm sorry, but I would really encourage you to get a management company. Like, I think if going through this lending process without an expert can be really tough. And so then, what I'll talk through here is the process and then the credit worthiness that associations look at. And again, I would just reemphasize it's really important to work with an experienced manager through this process, because that's just going to make all the difference for the association. But so the first step is really what we've kind of talked through already, and that's the authority for the loan. So making sure that you've got the appropriate approvals and that you understand your governing documents and how to approve a loan within your association. From there, you'll work on getting what's called a term sheet from your bank. And so most banks, us in particular, you can send us your financial package and a really short questionnaire, and then we can provide a couple of different options back to the association. We can kind of do a quick credit review and then give you some different terms so that you would know, generally speaking, what the rate would look like and what the repayment amount would look like. And we're happy to do that really early in your process. As you start having these conversations as a board of directors, you've got that information in front of you. So you have a sense of what the monthly cost would be per unit owner. And so after you've reviewed the terms and you're ready to move forward, you would sign the term sheet and then submit a formal application, and we collect an underwriting fee at that point in time. So the underwriting fee is basically just a fee that, ranges from, depending on the size of the loan, from a couple $1,000s to, it can be pretty big on a bigger loan, maybe $10,000 or $20,000. But that's a commitment to the bank that you're going to move forward with the process. And so if you ultimately decide not to do the loan, you would give up that underwriting fee, but we've never really seen that happen. And so then the bank starts the underwriting packet. And so you work with your manager to provide all the information about the association. That would be governing documents, several years of financial information, all the details about the project. And then with that information, the bank does what's called underwriting the loan or evaluating the loan, and then the bank will approve the loan. And at that point in time, you may or may not need an attorney opinion letter. Depending on the nature of the association and the project, banks will oftentimes require that you reach out to your attorney and have your attorney provide a letter that stipulates that the association has gone through all the necessary processes to approve the loan. And so just sort of one more safety check. And I oftentimes recommend to boards, even if your bank doesn't require an attorney opinion letter, it may be prudent to get an attorney opinion letter so that you're not opening yourself or the board of directors to any liability that you didn't understand the governing documents of the association, or you didn't enter into the loan appropriately and with the authority that the board has. And so once the loan's approved, we would then provide loan documents. And so this is all the documents that the association would then sign and complete to close the loan. And so you'll then sign all those documents and send them back to the bank with some final sort of closing items, which would be like the insurance for the association or other, minor piece of data that might not have been collected during the underwriting process. And then at that point in time, the loan is closed. And so the bank would then disperse the funds, typically speaking, directly to your contractor or your project management company who would be managing the project and dispersing the funds to the subcontractors and whatnot. So that's the process from start to finish. The timeline is always what board members are curious about, and that can vary very dramatically. We've closed some loans in as little as, 2 to 3 weeks. The association has all their documents together. They know exactly what the project is, and they're ready to move forward very quickly and expeditiously. And then we've had other cases where, the board has changed management companies multiple times. They don't have all their documents together, and that can take a little bit more time to put together all the information. And then the other piece that does, kind of play into this timeline, especially during this underwriting process, is making sure the bank has a good financial picture of the association. And that's what we can jump into next year, which is sort of the viability of the loan. How does a bank evaluate a homeowners association and lending, funds to them or extending credit? And so these are the major things that we look at here on the screen. So the first is the delinquency level. As far as I know, there are no HOA banks in the space that would lend to an association that has more than 10% of the homeowners not paying their monthly assessments. And really, most associations, most banks are looking for that number to be substantially lower, probably in the 5% range. Particularly right now, as we're potentially looking at a recession on the horizon, banks are going to want to make sure that your homeowners are consistently paying. And so if you're an association that has a higher delinquency and you're looking at getting a loan, I'd encourage you can start talking with your lender, but I would get, aggressive with your collection policy and make sure that you're following that and pushing the homeowners to pay their assessments to drive down that assessment amount. The other piece that banks look at is the owner occupancy and ownership concentration. So we tend to like associations that have more owners that are living within the community. And we're also very hesitant to lend to a community that has a few owners that own a lot of the units. And so you can imagine a circumstance where, a condo association has 100 units and one owner owns 30 of those units. That can make some banks a little bit more hesitant, but that tends to be pretty atypical, specifically here in Los Angeles. And then the owner occupancy, like if you do have a complex that has a high concentration of rental units, we can tend to mitigate that or understand it, but we just have to have some conversations with the boards and make sure we really understand the nature of the cash flow of those units and what the general equity looks like in those income units. So the other thing that was really important to banks is the number of units. This requirement varies by banks, but I typically see today in this environment, very few banks are lending to associations that have less than 20 units. And so if you're a smaller HOA, you may not be able to get a loan, but you can reach out to your manager or reach out to me and we can talk individually or specifically about the size of your community. But I would generally say if you have fewer than 20 units, it'd be pretty difficult to do a loan. And then the liquidity here is just another way of saying, what's the cash on hand that the association has. And so, we expect most associations to have at least 20% of their annual budget in cash on their balance sheet. And so if your association's below that number, what you might do is pass a special assessment today that's smaller or a portion of the overall project, or structure your special assessment so that people have to pay it, twice. Like maybe everybody owes $2,000 today, and then in 6 months, they owe another $15,000 or participate in the loan. And that can then increase or booster the association's cash because you have everybody paying that $2,000 up front. And that also helps the bank illustrate that the association can collect funds from the homeowners with the special assessment. So just making sure that you've got, a reasonable cash buffer is pretty important. And then a reserve study is really important. As I alluded to earlier in the conversation, banks like to see that the association has a long-term strategy and understands what other major expenses are coming up. And so it's really important that you've got a good sense of your association's, long-term requirements. And the best way to look at that is with a good reserve study. And then the last one is, or the last two, I should say, is the quality of the financial statements and if there's any unusual, activity there. And so it's really important that you work with a good management company that's producing good financial statements and that you can explain any variances or whatnot. It's not uncommon to see unusual activity with an association that's looking to borrow. Like a great example of this would be an association that's going to do a roof repair, a new roof. And then when we look at their income statement for the last 6 months, we see some spikes as they were doing, kind of holdover or short-term repairs on some of those units. So that's not too uncommon. And then the last thing that we look at is the total amount of the loan to the total amount of the property value of the community. And so, another way to think about that would be each individual unit is worth $700,000 and the association is borrowing, $15,000 per unit. like that's very reasonable. But if each unit's worth, $200,000 and the associations, not that there's any, you'd be hard pressed to find a condo here in LA for $200,000, I think. But we see this in other parts of the country where, a condo might be worth $200,000 and the association's looking to borrow maybe $100,000 per unit. And so that'll oftentimes give the bank some pause and, something that we want to think through in terms of the credit worthiness. And so I'll pause there. I talked about a lot, Sean. I don't know if there's anything that I should talk through in more detail or you think that the audience would be most interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's excellent. I think everybody's always worried if they are a good candidate when they're getting ready to engage in this loan process. I will circle back on the liquidity that you had mentioned, like potentially doing some kind of assessment up front if you need to raise cash flow and also show you can collect. And I'll just remind everyone that you can do that 5% without a membership vote. So whatever that the math comes out to in your particular association for 5% of your gross expenses, you could do that to kind of help with your liquidity. So you can look at this early on in the process. If you're looking at a loan in late 2023, now's the time to kind of start talking about it. And just, also the delinquencies, making sure that you are following up, you're approving those liens against owners that aren't paying, you're doing the things you need to do as a board for your fiduciary duty, and also so that you can engage in this process and there won't be any issues later.
Yeah, and I think you touched on what I would call out as sort of the major items, and that is the delinquency rate. So if you're an association that's managing that appropriately, and then let's say you have some cash flow needs, but you do the 5% increase and your community is more than 20 units, odds are here in Southern California, you would be able to qualify for a loan that's going to be appropriate. Like, the equity is pretty good here and whatnot. And so I think if you focus on those, you should be able to be a pretty good lending candidate for a bank.
Absolutely. Now, Craig, before we wrap this up, I think the elephant in the room and what every board member has on their mind is the rate. They want the best rates. They want to know how the rate is determined and how they lock in that rate. So can you just quickly tell us about rates? I know that they will be ever changing, but let us know how that's figured out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's a great question. And so, I'll talk a little bit about the HOA loan rate specifically here. And then what I've got on the screen now, and these will probably be a little dated. I took these screen images a little while back, but it's talking about what the rate environment is going to do. So for HOA loans, what's most common is you will get it's called an index, which is usually like the treasury rate. Like banks often call that the constant maturity treasury, but that rate plus a spread will be the rate that the association would see. And so like a good example of that would be a 10-year loan at the 10-year constant maturity rate here, which is going to be the second line item that you see on my screen here, plus let's say 3%. And so, the rate right now for 10-year treasury is about 4.25%. And then you add the 3% to that. So that's going to be 7.25%, would be the rate that an association would likely see today if they're doing a 10-year loan. And so there's sort of two important things I'd call out here for HOA loans is, one is that rate is set when the loan closes. And so oftentimes this process can take a little while. And so we've seen some associations that, they started to consider a loan like a year and a half ago when rates were much lower. And then as time has progressed, rates have gone up, and then they start the underwriting process and they get ready to close and they see that there's higher rates today. And so you just need to know that that rate is not set until the loan closes. And then the second piece here is that, people oftentimes like to compare their HOA rate to the rates that we most commonly think about as consumers, which is our mortgage rates. And so obviously mortgage rates are much higher today, but 7.25% for those of you that might be looking at or thinking about a mortgage is going to sound a little bit higher than a mortgage rate. And I think that the important difference there is that these are commercial loans. These aren't loans that are securitized by the actual property or an asset. And there's just not nearly as many of them in the markets. And so, banks have to have a little bit more of an expertise and specialized processes around it. So that causes the rate to be a little bit higher. So that's generally speaking the nature of rates in the HOA space. The other thing that I will say too is that it's not uncommon for an HOA loan to have what's called a rate reset in the middle of the loan. So again, this is very uncommon to a mortgage, but very common in commercial products. but that would be something like maybe a 10-year loan where the rate is set for the first 5 years and then changes in the middle of the 5 years for the next 5 years. And oftentimes I hear board members get a little nervous about having a rate reset in the loan. But I actually think that oftentimes it's a really good option for the homeowners associations because these loans tend to pay up front so quickly. By the time you get 5 years into it or halfway into a loan, your outstanding principal balance is much lower. And so you might take on a little bit of interest rate risk, the risk that the rates could go up. But because your balance is going to be so low 5 years into it, you might be able to get a little bit of a lower rate for the first 5 years, and it might be very reasonable to take on that interest rate risk. So that would be the other thing to be aware of. And so if you do see a rate reset in a loan that you're considering, there could be some benefits to that, and it's not necessarily something to be afraid of or to shy away from. And then in terms about what rates are doing more broadly in the market, what you see on the screen here are some print screens that I pulled from a Bloomberg terminal. And so the top chart is based on survey data, and this is what folks think that long-term treasuries will do, or I shouldn't say long-term, but just treasuries in general. And the second and third row here, what you probably most often see with an HOA loan, which would be the 10-year and the 5-year treasury rates. And you can see that they're both over 4% now, but sort of trending down a little bit over the next couple of quarters. And so, I don't encourage HOAs to sort of play the rate game or whatnot. Like if your community needs a loan, I would, do it sooner rather than later. But it is likely that some of the longer term interest rates could come down a little bit over the next, 6 to 18 months for associations that are considering that. But again, it's very difficult to speculate on these things. And then the bottom chart here, I'll sort of zoom in on this a little bit. So this is what the Fed funds forecast is. And so, when the Federal Reserve meets, what we anticipate rates doing. And so everybody does tend to believe that those rates are going to increase a little bit more over the short term, maybe the next 6 to 12, well, I shouldn't say 12 months, 6 to 9 months, and probably peak in early to mid 2023. And then, they'll likely plateau for a while, but then they could start to taper off into 2024. And so that just kind of gives you a little bit of insight into the shorter term rates, which tend not to be as relevant on the HOA loans because those are longer term rates. But the markets do, show some correlations between them. So yeah, I really appreciate the time, Shauna, and I don't know if there's anything else you want me to touch on here today.
I think we've covered a lot. I think there might be questions, so I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to say, if you need more information or if your HOA is exploring a loan or a special assessment or a large project and want to talk about it, I can be available. I can be a resource to you. I know Craig and his team are available and can be a resource. I think if we walk away with anything, it's to check your governing documents, engage your homeowners early, look through, make sure that you don't need any votes, get with Craig or his team to see what that loan process looks like in more detail for your association particularly. And don't forget to engage your attorney and get that resolution or whatever you need in place. Sometimes it's a legal opinion that the bank wants to see. So, waiting till the last minute to call your association legal counsel and say, hey, we need something is tough on them. So getting all of that together early and having proactivity in this process is really great. And we are happy to help. So thank you so much, Craig. This was wonderful. I hope everybody learned a lot. I don't know if you have anything closing or, but I think we can wrap this up and enjoy the rest of our ABCs.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I enjoyed being here with you all today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Alliance Association Bank brings you powerful banking solutions for the unique needs of the community association industry. From robust lockbox and electronic payment options to lending solutions and innovative technology, everything we offer is designed to help community management companies succeed. With Alliance Association Bank, you can expect us to be as dedicated to your success as you are. To speak to one of our expert bankers, visit allianceassociationbank.com.
Hey guys, I'm Owen and I'm here in beautiful Santa Clarita Valley interviewing people what they think about their HOAs. Let's go. Alright, so what's your name?
Cheryl.
Nice to meet you, Cheryl. I'm Owen. Do you live in an HOA?
I do.
You do. So
yes.
You know what HOA stands for?
Yes.
Yes. When I say HOA, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Problematic.
Problematic?
Sure.
right?
Uh-huh.
The first question is, do you live in an HOA?
I do not.
You do not.
So,
Okay.
I don't know. If
Do any of you guys live in an HOA?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Do you have any friends that live in HOA or anything?
I don't know. Nah.
No? Okay. What are your opinions on HOAs?
Because I don't live in one, I don't have like a super formed opinion, but when I have thought about it, I've often thought they're overpriced.
Yep.
Or, do they really deliver for the money anything, and are they more trouble than they're worth?
Do any of you know what HOA stands for?
I can't paint my house pig.
It stands for you can't paint your house? Homeowners?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Nothing?
I have no idea.
No idea. Okay.
Homeowners Association or something like that?
Yes, that is correct.
I've never heard good things about HOAs. How's that?
Me neither.
No one's ever like, thank God for my HOA.
So, when I say HOA, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
It's HOA. Management.
Management? Okay. What is the craziest HOA story you've ever had?
I made an improvement to my house. They asked me to paint the house, and so I painted the house, but didn't get approval first, even though I picked the colors on the chart.
So the approved colors were picked, and then you painted your colors, approved colors, and they said,
Right. They asked me, they said, you can bring an attorney, but you'll have to go to a fair hearing. I already painted the house. There was nothing more I was going to do.
That is kind of crazy.
That's crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the craziest HOA story that you have heard from like a friend or something?
I don't remember anything specifically, but it's always like some kind of nightmare about like the hedges or the color of this or something like that.
Something super micromanaged and just...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. On Zoom, are you guys a camera off or camera on type of people?
Camera off.
I also agree with that. Always have the camera off. Are you a Zoom camera on or off person?
On.
On? Why is that?
It's there.
It's there.
Also, I feel like if I'm being watched or, if somebody wants to engage.
Talk to you, you're there to just, the camera's on to talk to them. If your community had a Twitter account, would it be removed by Elon and why?
My community where I live?
Yeah.
I live in the middle of Los Angeles, so it's like hard to say specifically. I don't think it would be removed by Elon because there's probably enough people that would pay for the $8.
Pay for the $8, okay. So, enough people that want to be verified on Twitter.
Exactly.
That's funny. All right. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
No worries.
So, in the community that you guys live in, like where your house is, if you guys had a Twitter community, would Elon take down your guys' community posts?
Fuck. No, I don't think so.
No? No?
Yeah, nah.
Would you guys pay the $8 to be verified on Twitter?
Yeah. No.
No?
Not worth it.
Not worth it? Agreed. And last question, if your community and your HOA had a Facebook group or a Twitter group, would Elon take it down?
Oh, that I don't even know.
You don't even know?
I don't even know.
Okay. All right, no worries. Well, thank you very much. I
Yes,
appreciate
thank you.
it. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I'm honored to welcome Maria Cow to the panel of speakers today. Maria Cow uniquely serves as litigation and transactional counsel to community associations and has been serving them since 2009. With a litigation background, Ms. Cow's advice often comes with experience-based risk analysis. She has represented community associations of all sizes and has dealt with a broad spectrum of related real estate and land use issues. Ms. Cow's day-to-day work includes review and interpretation of governing documents, contract review and vendor negotiations, disciplinary proceedings, and, of course, litigation. Clients working with Ms. Cow can expect responsiveness, thoughtfulness, and a reliable gut instinct. The clients that work best with her are those who are direct and looking for legal guidance from an attorney who also has business acumen. Ms. Cow has consistently and continuously worked for common interest development since 2009. She was formerly a partner at Birding & Weil, and prior to that, she worked as an associate at Feldson & Lee. She is now a partner with Briscoe, Evester, and Basil. I would now like to introduce Matt Metters, the Chief Operating Officer of HOA Organizers. It's actually my great honor. I work very closely with Matt every single day, and he is a wonderful addition to this panel. Matt joined HOA Organizers in 2017. As our COO, he ensures that all parts of our company are working as a well-oiled machine. Matt's combination of people skills, as you will see shortly, positivity, and tenacity makes him a valuable asset to our company and to our clients. A native of Walnut Creek, he also spearheads our Northern California and Bay Area operations. Matt is currently a member of the Board of Directors for the Community Association Institute's Greater Los Angeles chapter. He has served on the Legislative Support Committee, annually traveling to the state capitol to advocate for community associations with a team of dedicated and driven individuals for CAI throughout the state. Matt is passionate about mentoring and educating, which is why he also serves as an educator and leader within our organization. As an alumni of USC, Matt had a career in real estate prior to joining the team. When not working, Matt enjoys cooking, opera, which he loves watching and singing, and thinking about how to make the world a better place. Maria and Matt are going to be talking to us today about board dynamics. At the end of the day, it's really important to make sure that board members can work together, not just with each other, but with their managing agent. Matt, I know he's going to start from here, so I'd love to hear what you and Maria have to share with us. Thank you both.
Thank you for that introduction, Netta. Today, we are going to be talking about an effective board and management relationship, how to avoid some of the common pitfalls that we see, and how to keep your community out of trouble. My name is Matt Metters. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of HOA Organizers, as Netta said, and I have successfully led communities through day-to-day issues as well as extensive large-scale projects with the tools that we will be sharing with you today. While managers have lots of experience and education and knowledge, we're not attorneys, and sometimes we need to call on the association's legal counsel to help us through. Ring, ring.
I am answering the phone. Hi, my name is Maria Cow, and I'm the attorney that Matt just called right now. I serve as corporate counsel and enforcement litigator for homeowners associations, and I've been doing it for a decade plus. And sometimes I get called on because associations get into legal trouble, but even before that, they need a little bit of legal guidance just to run their day-to-day operations and just to figure out what they have going on, and even just reading their, governing documents, just to know what that is and what they're responsible for. So in broad strokes today, it's all going to be about effective collaboration and also upholding your fiduciary duties. You are board members and you're serving as volunteers, but at the same time, your fiduciary is the association and your membership at large. And the problem with if you don't get it necessarily right is that you may be exposing yourself to a little bit of personal liability. By way of example, we have two main characters in our story today. We have board member Bob, who just can't get it together and does it totally wrong and doesn't effectively communicate and may be stepping into certain pitfalls. But we also have board member Betty, who says and does all the right things, just so you guys can see what it looks like between a good board member and a bad board member at accomplishing their goals.
So we're going to outline today in a series of do's and don'ts. And the first do that we have is to have a reasonable goal. So what is a reasonable goal? It is specific and it is measurable. So we know what we are trying to achieve and what the specific steps that we need to take in order to meet that goal are. It's very important to not be vague and be specific, and so that we keep those goals in mind and we don't get lost in the noise of the day-to-day when we're looking at our overarching goals.
The bad board member, Bob, he might say at a meeting something like this: I don't want assessments to go up. Well, the reason why this isn't a great goal is because it's vague and no one knows as if this is even a goal or if he's just crabby at the moment. It's unclear whether this statement is intended for any actionable task. Furthermore, it does not meet the standard for a responsible action item if taken as a standalone statement. And just as my little legal tidbit here, the association's job is to collect assessments as necessary to defray costs. Sometimes making a decision to meet fiduciary duty means to make a decision, like increasing assessments, that may be bad for the individual Bob, but good for the community at large, like, you know, having enough money to repair the common area.
Very true. And so now we look at a good example of what a board member might do by way of Betty. So Betty might be at the board meeting. She hears management's proposal to increase assessments. And she says, you know, I know that inflation is affecting everyone, including our community members. I don't think we should raise assessments, but I want to reduce spending by 10% over last year. Now, this may not fix all of the issues. Might you still have to increase assessments? Yes, but this is specific and actionable, and you know, it gives the community manager and the community as a whole things to look at in order to achieve it, right? So we can look at things like drought-tolerant landscaping, where we might reduce water spending. We can look at reviewing regular vendor contracts to make sure the association is getting a competitive rate. All of these things are in pursuit of Betty's goal of reducing spending by 10% over last year. Way to go, Betty.
So what's our takeaway between Bob and Betty at a board meeting? Well, one of the underlying takeaways is that you can do anything, but not necessarily everything. There's a lot of balls you have to juggle as a board member, but if you stay focused, you can definitely achieve it. And if you consult with your management team and your attorney and all the other appropriate vendors servicing your community, you can definitely get it done. But, you know, communication is definitely a tool that has to be implemented regularly and effectively.
All right, so let's talk about the next do, and the next do is do know your teammates. So board, you are not alone. You have folks that you can rely on with experience and expertise. And so part of this is setting expectations, clearly outlining responsibilities, and knowing the limitations of each of your vendors' responsibilities. So you can have these through conversations between outlining who's going to be doing what. But a really good solid point to start looking at is in your management agreements with your community association management company, project management contracts, and correspondence with your legal counsel. So some things that, you know, are common both in the day-to-day and in large-scale projects are who is posting notices, who's making the community informed, who's going to be making sure that the project specifications are being met, who is putting together those project specifications. So there are all these things that go into executing the goal, right? And you need to know who is going to be responsible for each one so that there is no confusion. So let's talk about Bob. Part of this is, again, in not knowing the limitations of what perhaps a community association manager can do. Bob says, as he is standing before a judge, no doubt, my manager told me I could do it. Well, guess what? Bob is the fiduciary of his HOA. The community manager is not. So while there are certain, levels of expertise that we as community association managers carry, not always, we're not attorneys again. So for something like an emergency special assessment where there are specific legal requirements that have to be met in order for it to be a valid assessment, your community association manager might not be the best one to make that call. You might have to engage the association's counsel to get, specific and in writing legal answers to those questions.
So Betty knows a little better than Bob. And she says at the meeting, hey, Matt, who do you think we should reach out to for an opinion on this? I hear it all the time with board members who get challenged in court on their decisions. With what Bob says, it's not uncommon. They say all the time, my community manager told me I could do it, so that means I could do it, right? It doesn't go over very well. the line of questioning always turns into, well, but is your community manager this qualification? Is your community manager your CPA? Is it your attorney? Is it your plumber? Is it your electrician? Is it your construction manager? Is it your fill in the blank? And it doesn't feel good when the follow-up answer is, no, they are not. And then the follow-up question is, well, then why did you rely on your community manager to tell you these things? So part of meeting your fiduciary duties is to rely on the right experts to make sound decisions. You wouldn't have a plumber do your electrical work, would you? So similarly, complex legal questions should not go to your management team. I mean, I'll say this, Matt has probably seen a lot, and he's probably seen it go down in a lot of different ways, but he would probably tell you, he's not going to give you a legal opinion about certain subjects, or any subjects actually. So the takeaway with that is to involve your attorney early and often. I hate to see a line item in your budget, $0 for legal for a year, sorry. So with your contracts, with your disputes, don't involve your attorney when you're already getting sued or when you already signed the document. It's way easier to help you in your decision-making process before you get into trouble. And it's way more expensive to unwind the problem after it already arises. It's just an extra layer of protection around your decision-making.
I love that. So the next do and or don't happens to be a don't and a do. So don't hide the ball. Do use your words. Not condescending, by the way.
Right. Use your words. Use your words. It's so important. Don't breadcrumb information. Something left out may be really important. And I see it all the time when I, have to collect all the documents for production, and I have to comb through the association's records. And somewhere along the way, I get a handle on an email or minutes that someone told me, oh, they just left out because they didn't think it was important, but turned out it was actually pivotal into, whatever thing we were looking at. So the bad board member, Bob, doesn't understand what it is to share all the information. And he might say something like this. He might say, my neighbor told me there was a leak. Can you check on that?
Now, let's talk about Betty, the good board member. Betty says, Mary in Unit 204 reported a leak in her kitchen. Can you call her ASAP? Now, did Mary say there is an angle stop that's leaking in her unit and it's been going on for 2 days? No. She gives the information that she has, but she gives enough so that it is concise, actionable, and it's timely. She just found this information out from Mary and she immediately reached out to her community manager. So the takeaway from this is that communication is key. Make sure that all parties are kept in the loop and that the information is delivered timely and that there is enough information, and don't withhold it just because you think it may not be important. It might be what keeps you out of trouble. So we love board member Betty, and we want all of our board members to be Bettys because she follows our takeaways and gets it done for her community. She is likely to uphold her fiduciary obligation to her association, and she's going to keep her community out of trouble.
So just as a recap for all of you, here's what we've touched on as Betty's shining qualities. Do have a reasonable goal. Do know who your teammates are and what their boundaries are. Don't hide the ball on anything with your teammates. And board members, if you want to be like a Betty and not a Bob, you may wish to seek out regular training to brush up on your skills. And when in doubt, use your words or just call Matt. He'll tell you what to do.
Yes, except I'm not an attorney and I don't give legal advice. So you might have to call Maria. In
And
any
that's
event,
fine with me too.
thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
I'd like to introduce Sandra Gottlieb, who is an ABCs of HOAs veteran. Sandra Gottlieb is one of California's leading community association attorneys and a founding partner of Swedelson Gottlieb, which limits its practice to the representation of California homeowners associations, including condominiums, planned developments, and stock cooperatives. Sandra has been practicing law for over 40 years, and she has provided legal counsel to community associations since the mid-'80s. Sandra has lived in 2 condominium associations, including a master and sub-association and a planned development. Sandra's extensive negotiation skills, acquired in the early years of her practice, has given her the ability to work with volunteer board members, associations managing agents, and opposing counsel to achieve intended results and to provide sound counsel regarding association operational issues. Sandra and her partner, David Swedelson, formed their law firm in 1987, bringing together David's extensive litigation experience with Sandra's extensive transactional background. As the firm's managing partner, she also leads the transactional team at Swedelson Gottlieb. Her experience in representing California community associations allows her not only to provide legal representation, but also counsel on the many different matters and issues that impact California's homeowner associations. Sandra's expertise is exemplified in her numerous publications in Swedelson Gottlieb's HOALawblog.com. I also just wanted to share one of the very first courses that I personally took was taught by Sandra just about 20 years ago. About 5 years ago, Sandra and I had the opportunity to speak together on a panel regarding bullying in homeowners associations. It's a great honor to have her here today. I'd like to introduce Demetrius Xanthos, who is the founder and CEO, as well as the chief educator for Sachs Insurance. Demetrius comes from solid stock, the descendant of Greek immigrants who brought with them to this country a highly developed work ethic and a belief in education that remain the drivers behind the success that Sachs and its clients enjoy to this day. Before opening Sachs, Demetrius got his legs and made his mark in the corporate world, selling insurance to Fortune 500 companies, including some of the largest contracts ever advanced. In keeping with the beliefs of his forebears, Demetrius put his stock in education, making education the basis of the Sachs Insurance Agency offering. Making people aware of the possibilities in a thorough, coherent way became the formula for progress at Sachs, which continues to expand. Demetrius is a highly regarded insurance industry educator, invited to give seminars throughout the country. I also want to add that Demetrius and Sachs Insurance have been speakers and sponsors of the ABCs of HOAs every single year for the 10 years in its production. I wanted to especially thank Demetrius for his highest level of sponsorship today, which makes today possible for us to be able to deliver education to all of you. Today, Sandra and Demetrius will be speaking about water intrusions and insurance claims. This is a hot topic as we talk about wanting to keep premiums as low as possible, limiting frivolous insurance claims, and of course, depending on the type of community, water intrusions and how to approach them. I look forward to hearing what you both have to share with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Netta. We're so appreciative that you invited us to share on this very special day with you and your boards of directors. We are going to ask Demetrius to start us off with a state of the insurance market.
Thank you, Sandra. And again, a pleasure to be here with you and a pleasure to be here again with all of the board members in attendance. Today, I think one of the reasons that Netta asked Sandra and I to speak about the topic of water intrusion is because if you're in the audience and you live in a community that was built in the mid-90s and newer, statistics say that 4 to 4.5 out of 10 claims will be water related. And if you're in the audience and you live in a community that is built in the mid-90s and older, the statistic jumps to almost 5.5 to 6 claims out of 10 will be water related. Now, why is that important in today's marketplace? It's important because this is one of the toughest insurance markets I've experienced in my 21-year career. And I want to share with you an analogy that seems to have resonated with folks I've spoke with throughout the year. If any of you recall a movie called The Perfect Storm, it featured George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, Diane Lane, and it was set in the Northeast, and they were commercial fishermen. And at the end of that story, you learn that a storm occurred that only has the chance of happening 1 every 100 years. And what it was is there was a large storm cell over our Great Lakes. And at the same time, there was a hurricane in the Caribbean. And at the conclusion of that movie, that storm cell from the Great Lakes and the hurricane collided in the perfect spot in the Atlantic Ocean to create the perfect storm. Now, what does this have to do with insurance? You know, in 2019, if you recall, I shared with you that in the first time in many, many years, carriers were coming to us stating that there would be double-digit price increases. So if you would, we knew about that storm over the Great Lakes. In addition, we were at that time coming out of our 5th consecutive fire season in the Western US. So we knew about that hurricane in the Bahamas. What we didn't know is the following. And Sandra, I'd ask you this question, being a native of Los Angeles. What do you think Hollywood would name a movie where 5 major storms all collided at the same time?
I think just it'd be one word. Seriously?
I love it. So here's my 5 storms. We knew price pressure. We knew that there was firestorms. We have to add the storm of COVID. We have to add the storm of inflation. Inflation that we have not seen since Jimmy Carter. And last but not least, we have to add a supply and demand issue. What do I mean by that? In the HOA insurance marketplace over the last 2.5 years, we have not lost one, but we have lost 2 insurance companies that specialize in writing residential condos. It's not like they found replacement paper. They literally issued cancellations and went away. We've also lost 2 single-family community markets that specialize in insuring single families. Again, they did not replace their paper. They issued cancellations and they went away. Why is this problematic? It's problematic because over the last 20 years, whether you want to focus on California or any other of the growing Western US states, the only thing national and regional home builders have built are HOAs. So the demand for HOA insurance products is at an all-time high, while the supply of HOA insurance products is at an all-time low. So when you put these storms together, especially when you add inflation and price pressure, I call that the 1-2 punch. The carriers know it's more expensive to rebuild your buildings, to rebuild the elements of your community. So they're not only asking you to carry a higher value, they're asking you to pay a higher premium on that higher value. So with that being said, I'd like to turn this back over to my friend Sandra, where she's going to cover basic legal principles on the topics we'll be discussing today.
So first of all, I read an article last night while I was preparing for our presentation today, and I noticed there's a new number, 358,000 homeowners associations in the United States. It's just a mind-boggling amount. $11 trillion worth of real property. So we have a lot at stake, and so do the carriers. And they keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter on what they're willing to pay, and higher, higher, and higher, as you just said, Demetrius, in what it's going to cost our associations. So what we need to do from a legal perspective is get on the front end of that and look to see what the association's exposure to liability potentially is going to be. So the first general principle is look at your governing documents. See if there's anything that will change the general principle of law. And the general principle is the association is responsible for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of the association's common elements, and the owner is responsible for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of their unit airspace, also known as the interior. Why is that important? Because we need to see if there's anything in the governing documents that would change that responsibility. It is a hard pill for homeowners to, in the event of a loss, to swallow when they are told, well, we know this happened from a common area component, but the reality is that you have to fix the interior of the unit. So we're going to look to what caused the damage. We used to say it's the source of the damage. It's not really the source of the damage. It may have come from the common area components. What we need to look at is not the source, but how did we get there? What we are looking for is a standard, and you know all about this, Demetrius, absent negligence. So if the association is not negligent, unless you have a very odd set of CC&Rs, the association is not going to be responsible for the resulting damage in the interior of an owner's unit. Last Friday, when Demetrius and I were preparing, I was telling him I had a 38-floor flood at a high rise in Northern California. And everybody wanted to look for who was at fault, who was at fault. And they started blaming the association, who had just flushed all of their lines, horizontal and lateral. And I thought, my association is going to be in a good position here. So I think we should, in order to get to the next level of this presentation, is talk about what negligence is. I'm not going to give you the legal definition necessarily. Informally, we're going to say it's failing to take proper action to do something. The maintenance, repair, or replacements of the items that the association is responsible for, not inspecting regularly, allowing for deferred maintenance to occur. I know in 2022, when we say deferred maintenance, we all think of Surfside. I think of California. What things do we keep putting aside to make sure that we can keep assessments low? That really isn't the goal and shouldn't be. It's what it takes to properly maintain the association so that in light of a loss, we know that the association will not be bearing the brunt of the responsibility. So we're going to briefly talk about just two different hypotheticals. If there's a common source damage, such as plumbing, windows, or roof, and the damages occur both in common area and in multiple units, or if there's a unit source, so in-unit sink, toilet, damages multiple units, which is what happened in my Friday event, and then affected the common area. So we know in both of these hypos that an owner will report a water intrusion event, and they're going to say, association, do something. And the first thing management is going to say is, did you make a claim on your HO6 policy? Why should I have to do that? They say. The association has insurance. And that leaves it up to the manager to try and explain to the homeowner the reason that they cover and carry insurance is to cover the interior damage to their unit coming from this water event. So we want to make sure that the association does identify the source. And I'm assuming, Demetrius, I'm going to explain this, and I want to make sure from an insurance perspective that you agree. Our firm's position is clean it up. Get rid of that water intrusion, get rid of the water, dry it out, and worry about assigning liability later. Would you agree that's an appropriate and defensible response from an insurance perspective?
And, pursuant to our conversation, what I'd really like to remind everyone in the audience is that the insurance contract is a legal agreement, and the insurance company is the insurer, and you are the insured. And in that legal agreement, as the insured, you are agreeing to act as rapidly as possible to identify, in this particular case, what is causing this water intrusion, and B, you have agreed to take action to mitigate further loss. So for those boards who, again, understandably might be a little jittery, not sure what to do, it is actually your legal duty, based on the insurance policy you entered into, to act to mitigate further damage and then pause.
So that's what we think as well. One of the things I'd like to make a suggestion to the board members attending today is that if you don't have a water and insurance policy, create one. It becomes a rule and regulation of the association, an enforceable policy. and make sure that it says that when the association does exactly what Demetrius just referenced, which is clean this up, it doesn't mean it's assuming liability. There's no assumption of liability. It just is the board of directors meeting its responsibility under the very policy that Demetrius was addressing. So we know that if we have that policy, the association is going to assess what's going wrong. They're going to pay for the common area damage, and they're going to make a claim. They're going to contact the association's carrier and put them on notice. Where are they?
Sandra, sorry.
Yes.
You know, what I wanted to interject conversationally is that, you know, you and I both know that in the audience, there isn't one board member who has the same set of governing documents as possibly the person they're sitting next to, right? And in the audience, we have a collection of HOA types. We have high rises, mid rises, mixed use. We have single family communities without amenities. We have single family communities with extensive amenities. And one of the things that I know I want to drive home, and I believe Sandra is going to continue to drive home, is you need to understand your set of governing documents. And for those of you that have older sets of governing documents, I'm sure Sandra and I are going to touch on the concerns and issues that those bring. But those of you who are sitting on rewritten sets of governing documents or newer sets of governing documents, they're pretty explicit and they're pretty direct on who's responsible for what. Would you agree with that, Sandra?
I'd say that they're cloudier than I would like, Demetrius. I think that's one of the reasons that boards do want to restate their governing documents or amend them so it's clear who is responsible for what. We're also a huge fan of creating a matrix, either on existing documents or new documents, so we know down to the hardware who is responsible, the homeowner or the association. So when you have a catastrophic loss that's occurring, everybody is not scrambling. We can take out the matrix and see, okay, here's where this happened. This is what the association is responsible for. This is what the homeowner is responsible for. And all of that is going to happen after we do step one, which is go in, clean it up, and remediate the actual and immediate impact of the water event, which we are asking the homeowners to do in their unit as well. So we do run into problems from an operational standpoint at that moment in time when the homeowner says, I'm not letting you in, I'm going to take care of it, I'm calling my lawyer, you guys were negligent, you didn't take care of this. And all of the accusation bombs are flowing back and forth. And all I can say to everybody who's attending today is step it back and step it down, because nothing can be more detrimental to the resolution of an insurance claim if the kids are fighting. And when the adjuster is speaking to the board of directors and the homeowner is contacting the adjuster directly, and they see the schism between the two entities, the homeowner and the association, it gives them pause. I think it's really important to say, and this is without judgment, your insurance company is a risk management company. Their job is to cover you, but their corporate job to themselves is to see how they can get out of that risk. And I mean no insult, but I think it's true. Can you actually say I'm wrong?
What I would say is in this particular section, there's a couple things going on here. Depending on the insurance company that you've contracted with, there's one of two ways this can go, Sandra. If you're with an insurance company that in their insurance documents, they plan to adjust a loss based on what they call a follow-through form, that in my eyes is the best policy to have, because the carrier is going to follow through on the association's coverage requirements based on the governing documents of the HOA. Now, we can get into a discussion how that can get cloudy based on age and when they were rewritten, et cetera. But the other more important part is if you are with an insurance policy that is not follow through to the governing documents, just a click, we include interior, click, we include improvements. What everyone in the audience needs to know, especially in this marketplace, when claims riddled associations are being financially punished for heavy claim activity, you do not want to be an association that paid out on a claim that you shouldn't have. So you want to really work with your insurance professional to make sure that you have a policy that follows your governing documents. Because if you do not, that insurance policy that you purchased, it's filed with the Department of Insurance. That means that insurance company is legally responsible to follow the letter of coverage they sold you. And I'm sure, Sandra, I have seen many experiences where the insurance company paid more on a claim than they should have because they got involved in components inside the unit that the governing documents said they should have never been involved in, but they were in a policy that afforded coverage to the interior. That's why I felt that this was a good side kind of conversation, because I don't agree that the insurance companies are looking to get out, but I do think they're aligning to what the coverages are that they must be obligated to.
Well, you brought up an issue that I think is I deal with all the time. And when I speak to my peers, they do as well. And that is our board members who are furious when the carrier pays out on a claim that is not consistent with the documents, because they're very worried about the precedent that's going to set in the association. I would say this year alone, I probably was instructed 3 to 5 times by a board to contact the carrier and say, don't pay out on that claim. And my advice to the board is never interfere with that process. Because if something happened with that claim and we wound up with a catastrophic loss and the association had the carrier pull back from coverage, they would say your notification was invalid because you withdrew our participation. So we had no way to protect ourselves and you and our interests by properly handling this claim. So we need to be really mindful of making sure that the policy and the governing documents are aligned. And I think that's a really responsibility for the board of directors, legal counsel, and their broker. I'm really shocked frequently, and tell me how you feel about this. Yeah, I don't think that our boards really understand that you are in there, not just on the day you sell them the policy. If they want to speak to you, can you zoom into a board meeting to explain something to a board of directors about the policy when they don't understand how it actually is applied when there's a loss? Or is that not a service as a broker that you would provide?
No, we welcome the opportunity to interact, and I'm going to use the term educate our board members, because I really enjoy dealing with educated board members because they tend to make great decisions, right? And that's why when I believe we get to a point where we're now crossing from an insurance conversation to a legal conversation, that I welcome the legal expert to get involved. And I can tell you, just in the past month, I had a scenario where a board was really struggling with a very difficult situation, and it took the addition of HOA counsel to lead them down the correct path, right? So to your question, I always welcome the opportunity to get engaged. I always encourage the board to seek the other professionals in that space. Additionally on this topic, I think the biggest mistake that can happen is not understanding what your specific insurance section of your governing documents states. Because the other thing, as you know, Sandra, is a lot of the newer governing documents make the board trustee for policy, which means that during the election process, the homeowner relinquishes their say in the association's insurance and turns it over to the board to file, to settle, to withdraw, to disperse. So again, understanding what your governing documents say and empower the board to do, I think is critical.
I think it's critical as well, but you raise a really important point that we hadn't even discussed previously, and that is when the homeowner makes the claim unilaterally and the carrier says, well, you may be the trustee for the policy, but since they pay assessments, they are part owner of this policy individually, and we cannot not open that claim or address that claim. And that's very difficult for board members to understand as well. We like to have clear policy so homeowners know how this will play out in the event of a loss. But I do want to alert everybody to the possibility that an owner can do an end run around the board in contacting the carrier and making a claim directly under the association's policy. And I agree with you 100%. I would then go back and look at the language of the policy and attempt to have a conversation with the owner as to why this is so important that the association handle the claim and the processing of that claim. So let's say the claim has been handled and there's an allegation, and possibly correctly, that the association was negligent. And then we have to look whether it was negligent or grossly negligent and what the criteria might be under your association's governing documents. And there's a payout. We know that there's a retention amount. We all understand, and if you're taking this class, that no one pays the retention. It's the payout less the amount of money of the retained amount that will be paid out. And people say all the time, Sandra, how can you request a homeowner to sign a release when they have an entitlement to the money under both the policy and the governing documents? When there's an issue of negligence, we recommend that the associations do request that the owner agree to a release agreement. It doesn't mean if subsequent damages during the remediation process are discovered that the homeowner is locked out of that. And a well-drafted release would address that on a going forward basis as well. But I think it's important to protect the association and the owner as to what is being paid out and what is being released against the association. Do you have any thoughts about that, for or against the possibility of an association requesting a release agreement from an owner?
Well, I think that's prudent business. And I think a lot of the carriers also in the payout are looking for a release from the allegation or any future allegations of damage arising out of this particular occurrence. I would say, not to cloud it, what I would say is that, you know, as we look from 10,000 feet at this scenario we're trying to paint, okay, where we now have exposure to common area damage and we have water intrusion into units. I want to make this a little granular for the audience. Let's say we're sitting on a set of governing documents where the HOA has no legal interest inside the exclusive use airspace, commonly known as bare walls, okay? Now, with that being said, and of course, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm kind of in your lane right now, typically the governing documents would have a mutual waiver of subrogation. Would you agree with that?
Traditionally, yes.
Traditionally, yes, right? Which means that regardless of cause, each party is responsible for their own insurable interest, right? So even though the HOA caused Sandra to lose her Italian leather couch, they can't pursue the HOA, and vice versa. Just because Sandra burnt down the building, the HOA can't pursue Sandra to rebuild the building. Now, the reason I'm going down this lane is the HOA's policy has two sides to it, and you kind of referenced it. First party property and third party property. Now, our first party property, those are those components the HOA is responsible to insure. Third party property is property that the HOA has no legal interest in. So to dovetail into Sandra's example, if there was an allegation of negligence, true negligence, the water intrusion therefore happened because the HOA didn't hydrojet, didn't repair this, didn't repair that, whatever the allegation is, there would actually be two claims. There would be a claim to open on the property side, and then there would be a claim to opened on the general liability side of the policy, because it's the general liability side of the policy that addresses third-party property damage. So this would become a little bit more complicated.
I think that one more thing to remember is there could be another coverage that should be brought into play here as well, and that's the D&O insurance coverage. So if there's any contention that the board of directors acted inappropriately or that there was a negligent action by the board of directors, failure to take action, or negligence in the performance of the action, we want to make sure that the D&O carrier is on notice as well of a potential claim. Would you agree?
Yes, and Sandra, you lead us to a point that we wanted to make sure in our conversation we hammered home. There's a lot of sometimes indifference. Should we file a claim? Shouldn't we file a claim? What does it mean to tender a claim? What I shared with Sandra and Sandra agreed is that we always want to notice the carrier of an incident or potential incident. Now, depending on the carrier may have the ability to truly just make a notice so that it's duly noted. But I'm finding, Sandra, more often carriers actually want to open a claim, have a claim number assigned, even to the potential allegation. But what they're doing is then they're pending it no action with a zero payout. And really, that is the way to go, because if this does escalate into a true allegation, we don't want the carrier to execute that they weren't duly noted in a timely manner. So I would rather have a claim number assigned with a zero payout and a zero activity than no notification.
And I understand that and I appreciate it. But we have boards of directors and we're dealing with their managing agents who are worried about the impact of the claims history. It's frequently why they contact the brokers and they say, can you just notate in the file that I've called you, that you have notice of this? And frankly, it really depends on the volume of business. Let's call it what it is. We are in a business environment. Your way is the 100% correct way. I will not argue with that at all. But it doesn't always work out that way, or at the moment in time when no one really knows what the loss is. They're afraid to open a claim and have a claim number and have a loss run, even though it's identified with a zero payout. It's still part of the run. So it does require an informed decision of the board of directors as to how they want to proceed. We certainly do not want to ever take a risk that the carrier would be in a position to say that the association did not timely file the claim.
And again, I go back to our earlier conversation. I would welcome legal counsel's input on the process, right? So as you and I know, 9 times out of 10, I'm an agent that likes to write policies that gives the board the ability to choose their own counsel. And the reason that is 9 times out of 10, it's HOA counsel that's predominantly already ingrained in the issue. They know the facts, they know the matter. Unless the allegation grossly extends out of their sphere of expertise and a true legal expert in the allegation needs to be brought in, it's usually counsel who knows best. And this could be, a lot of times, Sandra, right, it's a repeat offender. It's that same unit owner. It's that same group of unit owners always trying to stir the pot. So that's where I think a collaborative decision is fine. But that is my position. I would rather have the carrier noticed than not noticed, because I think the downside is too great.
It's not that I don't agree with you completely. I just know from a business operational standpoint, we run into issues, and it's deliberative. We must really deliberate on these issues, figure out what the loss is going to be, and make that decision. Let me ask you this question. What's considered timely notice? Is it 24 hours, 72 hours, 30 days?
Yeah, I think within the 30-day window, they're going to have a hard time saying you didn't properly or duly note. I think it's, I've seen scenarios that transcend 5, 6, 7 months. And the other issue, and again, to the audience, we just got the 30-minute, we're coming into the end of our time slot, but this is an important topic. The problem with it's not a problem, the challenge with the D&O policy, it is written on a claims made basis,
right?
Which means that the claim needs to be made in the active policy period. And so if we wait and all of a sudden we now leave that policy period and enter into a new policy period, depending on the language of that specific D&O policy, they may or may not provide coverage via a retro date for prior acts, right? And that's a whole other 30-minute conversation that you and I could have, Sandra. But yes, I
while you're dealing with a loss, be mindful of the expiration date of your policies. Ask that question, board, of your managing agents. When does our policy come up for renewal? When does it end? Do we have a tail, which is coverage after the expiration date? So those are all very, very important questions for us to address. Did you have some closing comments you wanted to make, Demetrius?
Sandra, I'll try to make them as fast as possible. And Sandra and I wanted to spend more time on this, and we do apologize. But if you're a board member in the audience today, and you are experiencing what Sandra and our clients are experiencing, which is the following. If you're a community that's ill-funded, ill-maintained, have a brutal loss record, and you're really struggling to even get insurance terms, let alone full replacement, or if you've been bitten by the restructuring of high brush or high fire zones, and you can't find coverage, really work with your insurance professional and really involve legal counsel, because you might be in a position where the only thing you can purchase actually puts you in conflict with your governing documents, meaning your governing documents might require that the HOA purchases 100% replacement value of all common area interests, but the market is not offering you that. They're offering you some form of sub-limit and at an extensively high price. And you really want to work with legal counsel, because you're doing the best you can, but it's just where we are in the marketplace today.
So I agree with that. We're referencing a situation where one of my clients, their governing documents require full replacement value. There's no qualifying language for if commercially feasible, if commercially reasonable. It doesn't matter what the cost is. The property has been recently valued collectively at $1.4 billion. They can't afford replacement coverage. And therein lies the problem with, are they board of directors breaching the association's governing documents by not obtaining that insurance, and at what cost, if they can't commercially or reasonably buy policies? So yes, let's be very mindful of what the governing documents say. I'm a full advocate of having qualifying language in the CC&Rs as to commercial feasibility and reasonable costs so that boards of directors can make informed, non-reactive decisions. We thank you all so very much for attending. Both of us are so appreciative of HOA organizers to involve us in this very important educational day. And we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I would also like to introduce Melissa Bauman Ward and Ross Bartlett as our final panel of speakers. Melissa Bauman Ward has extensive experience representing common interest developments, including master planned communities, condominium projects, senior communities, mixed-use projects, high-rise developments, and co-ops. The majority of her practice involves interpreting, amending, and enforcing governing documents, advising boards on day-to-day operations, elections, and compliance matters, real property and title issues, negotiating and drafting contracts and other agreements, and dispute resolution. Prior to 2010, Melissa practiced as a corporate and real estate attorney, handling transactional business and real estate matters, as well as real estate litigation. Melissa is a member of the Walnut Creek Planning Commission and currently serves as the commission's vice chair. She is a past president of the Diablo Symphony Association and is a member of the symphony's cello section. Melissa is an attorney with Adam Sterling and does work closely with Adrian Adams. I'd also like to introduce Ross Bartlett. Ross is a retired police captain, and because of his extensive experience, he brings a unique perspective to speak with Melissa today about safety and security concerns, which I know is a concern to all of us. This will be the last panel and topic for the day. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing what you both have to share with all of us.
Well, hi, everyone. This is Shauna Gatlin again with HOA Organizers. I am the Vice President of Organizational Advancement. And with me now is Ross Bartlett, who is a retired police captain, I think. So tell me about yourself. Tell everybody who you are, your background, and what you're doing now.
Great. Thanks for having me here today. My background, basically, I started in police work when I was 19, was a cadet for a local police department out in Los Angeles County. And I worked in the police law enforcement world for 32 years. And yes, I did retire as a captain of a police department just outside Los Angeles. It was a great career. I enjoyed it very much. And then after I got out of law enforcement, I started doing security, and I do all sorts of different security work. And part of that work includes working with regular guards, doing video guarding, doing private investigations. And I also do team security for one of the NBA teams.
Excellent. Well, I hope that is our local team. So to Los Angeles for our Northern Californians. Well, okay, great. So I just wanted to jump right in. This segment is all about safety and security, which I think is on all of our board members' minds, our homeowners' minds. Can you just tell me a little bit about the current times we're in? You know, I know there's crimes of desperation. What else? And what can people do to stay safe and vigilant?
Well, I think law enforcement right now is struggling with resources. It's hard to hire new officers right now. And so I kind of look at your personal safety or your business safety as being similar to when you go to the doctor. You can go to the doctor and get the advice, but it's really a good idea to start taking things, kind of just monitoring your activity and keeping logs about things that occur so that you can assist and work together with the police department as opposed to just going there and expecting that they're going to handle everything from the beginning to the end. So part of that is I always use the term situational awareness. There's a lot of things going on right now where if you just become a little bit more aware of your surroundings, you can hopefully prevent some of those things from happening and being a victim yourself. And it's very important for me to point out that I'm not talking about getting into being paranoid. I'm just talking about little things, small things like not going out to the ATM at night, being aware if somebody potentially is following you. Maybe you take a different route home this evening, and small things like that can add up to, being better protected as you're going about your day.
Excellent. I agree. I think there's just little tiny things we can all do to be a little bit more safe. Now, Our attendees today are board members, HOA members. So what are some practical ways that an association can work with law enforcement, the relationships they can make just to help make their communities safer?
Yeah, so like I just said, it's about taking matters kind of in assisting the police department, working together with the police department. So, for example, most police departments have what we call at my department a community lead officer. And so I'll give the example. If you had 4 times in a week that you call the police department, most likely you're going to have 4 different officers respond, and they're not necessarily going to be aware of the other incidents of the 3 other prior calls. So what a community lead officer does is they don't respond to calls. They get assigned to a certain area of the city, and they monitor the activity for a reoccurring situation. So you usually want to reach out to the police department, maybe develop a relationship with maybe the watch sergeant, with the community lead officer. And you also just want to be mindful of keeping activities, keeping a log out, noting the different things and the different calls, so that if an officer does come out and they're not familiar, you have the officer's name, you have the case number, you have the incident, and you can make reference to that. And down the road, if you have to, end up in court, you have all that documentation that you can provide to either a prosecutor or a police officer.
Yeah, and I would say it's always good to make documentation, right? I mean, you want to have that. The more you do that, kind of the better positioned you are if anything else happens.
Correct. But you don't want to rely entirely on them doing everything. You want to put yourself in the best situation to provide them with the most information about the situation that you're trying to resolve, so that you can help them in the best way to help you resolve it.
Excellent. What are some other proactive ways board members can be in front of this with law enforcement? Can they do anything ahead of time, even if nothing's happening in their neighborhood?
Yeah. So one of the things is sometimes you might have homelessness is a situation that's occurring, in most areas. And so a lot of cities and city prosecutors want to have you pre-sign a form that says that you are willing to prosecute somebody in the event that a police officer effects an arrest, say for trespassing. So there's forms that you want to find out that you can do ahead of time before that officer responds, to be able to get those forms signed, let them know that you're interested in prosecution. And there's things like that you can get through the watch sergeant or the community lead officer. But those are proactive steps that you can take ahead of the event, so that you're best prepared to deal with the law enforcement officer when they respond.
Excellent. So for the board members on here, that would be something you could team up with your community manager to do, to interact with the local station, police station, or watch sergeant, like he said, and see if we can get those papers filed for you. So what are options? I know, teaming up with the law enforcement agencies is really important in establishing a relationship, documenting, but a lot of HOAs want to take matters into their own hands and hire some kind of private security. So can you just walk us through what those options are and what they look like?
Yeah, so obviously a physical security guard is always a good option. You have somebody on scene and somebody that can be there for in the event that something occurs. It is costly. So if you were to hire a security company, my advice on hiring a security company is be proactive in all of this. So find your security guard company before the incident takes place. The last thing you want to do is end up going on Google and just finding a random company that may not be licensed. Maybe they don't have the right insurance. Maybe they're not accredited through the state. All those things that you can do proactively before an incident takes place. You don't want to hire just the local off-duty officer that's not tied to a company and doesn't maybe have the right insurance. So all those things are things that you could look at ahead of time. And then there's also things where if you can't necessarily afford to have a guard sitting there for 12 hours or 24 hours, there's also locations that you can do video monitoring where they actually tie into your existing camera system, and then they'll set up an invisible geofence. And then if somebody comes onto the property, they will either do a speaker announcement to the person, hey, the property's closed, you're not a resident, you need to leave, the police are on the way. And then also keep in mind too, when those video monitoring companies call the police department and they're watching, say, the crime in progress, there's usually a higher priority assigned to that call because we're actually watching and saying, hey, this is a crime that's actively occurring. And it allows the person on scene or the monitor to be able to give a suspect description, any vehicle descriptions, any of that pertinent information to first responders. Are they armed? That kind of stuff. So that's usually about the fifth of the cost of hiring a guard. And in some cases, people will do a combination of both. They'll reduce the cost of maybe not having multiple guards. They'll have one guard on site, and then they'll do it in conjunction with video monitoring. The other option you have too is you have a lot of guard companies that will do a response. So if you have that homeless person that shows up, and you want to call the police department, but maybe they don't have the resources to immediately respond, then you have your guard company come out. They're usually a pay by response. And then you just let that person get notified, hey, you're trespassing, you need to leave the property. And usually that's pretty effective. They don't want to be bothered, so they'll move on from where they're at. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to have the person on the HOA board going out there and confronting somebody where they're not sure who they're dealing with and possibly if that person's, dangerous or not. So usually that's a good option to have a guard service that can respond in the event of those low priority calls that the police department may not be able to respond to right away.
Which I think is excellent for boards that have varying budgets because the guard 24-hour guard is just costly. Labor is expensive. And so having these alternatives, which are the surveillance monitoring or a roving guard or a guard that only comes out in the event of a situation is really excellent. I think we're about to wrap this up, Ross. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I just think it's important that when you look at a complex, if you're on the HOA and you're trying to make your complex as safe as possible, just look at it from the street level. When someone's walking down the street or on the sidewalk, it's always good to have cameras that are visible. You don't want to hide your cameras. You want somebody to see that you as an association take security important. And you have the alarm sign, you have the gates all closed. You routinely change the code on your gates so that the people who aren't living there can no longer access it. You have lights. One of the things is really easy to do is if you have exposed electrical panels, just put a very simple lock on it. So it makes it more inconvenient for someone to be able to turn off the power. Just minor things like that. Just when someone looks from the property, they look at you, all those things, cameras, motion lights, signs that are posted that you're video monitoring, all those things that cause them to go somewhere else that maybe doesn't take security as important.
Excellent. I think those are all really great lists. I know we talk about those as deterrents so that if someone's approaching and they're going to either hit one community or another, make yourself the community that isn't the one that's easy. Well, I really appreciate all of your time, Ross. This has been excellent. I think that we've walked away with a lot of information and options for boards to take forward with them. So thank you so much. And we're going to be meeting with Melissa, who is an attorney from Adams Sterling, in just a minute. But thank you, Ross. I know you have to go, so we really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me. Have a good day.
So now we have Melissa Ward from Adams Sterling. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. So we are super excited to chat about safety and security. But first, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and let everyone know how long you've been in the industry, what's your background.
Right. Yeah, thank you. So I am a lawyer, and I've been a lawyer for, I like to think about 1 million years, but it's really been about 30. And I've been an HOA lawyer exclusively for a little more than 13 years. I live and work in the East Bay. Most of my clients are associations in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I love working in this industry. It's just really important to me because I feel like I get to work with the things that are absolutely most important to people, and that's their families and their homes and their communities. So I'm dealing with the big important stuff. And that's really, it's just an honor and a pleasure to be able to do that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Now, I know as we prepared for this conversation that you definitely have a passion about safety and security as it relates to HOAs. What are you seeing in the industry, and what are some of the trends you've been noticing with your clients?
So that is a really great question. And I think one of the things that's really affected all of us and has affected this area most of all is our collective experience in the last 2 or 3 years with COVID. Because COVID has really amplified everything. And we live together in these small communities. A lot of times people are living literally on top of each other in condominium buildings or other things. And it's really made everything more intense and bigger because we were home all the time. So all the issues that may have existed before that may have related to our lives living together suddenly got bigger and more immediate. And so we started to see more violations of association rules and other people breaking the law or other rules. And we started seeing a lot more conflict between neighbors and other people because they're just home all the time. And, you didn't know they played music all day until you were home trying to do a Zoom call, right? So this came up. And we also saw, I think, partly just because of our society and what's going on, but partly because of COVID, we saw a lot more people having mental health crises in their daily lives. And this kind of bled out and affected the whole community because all of a sudden it's not somebody alone in their home. It is immediately the interaction with other people. And that, can be a problem for an association that doesn't really have the authority or the ability to deal with some of these really big real world problems, but we're being asked to handle them anyway. So that's one of the trends that I've been seeing. And another trend that I'm seeing, which I think also was amplified by COVID a bit, is using technology to try and connect with each other and to try and resolve some of these issues that we're facing. I think we all we're on Zoom right now doing this thing. And I for me, I had never been on a Zoom meeting before COVID started. And now it's like my life, right? We're doing this. And it's a really good way to stay connected, but we're also seeing other things, other app-based surveillance cameras and security programs that can be used that are really robust and easy to use. We got our phones with us all the time, and now all of a sudden we have these tools. Like I literally get a notice every time my surveillance camera and my personal unit, somebody comes by. I mean, usually it's the cat next door, but it's something that's going on that we can monitor on a much more cheap and effective basis than we used to be able to. And then we're also using more app-based communication tools like Building Link or other tools, and that is a really interestingly, a really good security and safety function for our communities because being in better communication with each other makes all of us safer and more aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. I couldn't, and I'm going to go off script and ask you a question later because you just jogged a memory that I want to touch base on. But first I wanted to say, so we met with a security or a retired police captain. And one thing that he was giving us a lot of advice on law enforcement and that relationship, but can you just describe the role of an HOA and how that differs from law enforcement and, rule enforcement?
That is such a good question because, I like to tell my clients and people generally, I'm like, there's no HOA police, like this really isn't it. But we do have enforcement obligations and responsibilities. And I think the really important thing is to kind of HOAs, you need to understand that our authority and our role and our whole reason for being is more limited than, like the police department. Our entire purpose of being is to manage and maintain our communities. And that really is mostly the real property of our communities. We're supposed to take care of the common area. And then, we have this whole overlay of taking care of the corporation. That's the HOA dealing with elections and doing this other stuff. But, so people tend to think, they go back and forth. Like they want the lawn to be really nice and the pool to be really great, but, they don't want to get lots of hassle about I don't want another violation notice for not trimming my plants correctly or, something like that. So we're always going back and forth on this. But the issue arises when we get these kind of use restriction violations or just living together violations or nuisance violations that kind of become that they're people problems really. And so we're trying to use this framework of taking care of property to deal with people problems. And it's not always a good marriage of these two things. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not, because if the problem's really that somebody's got a substance abuse problem or a mental health issue and they're acting out, and we're like, well, we're going to fine you for damaging this property that you did. Like, that's not really solving the problem. It's, but the association really doesn't have the authority to, I mean, we obviously can't arrest anybody. We can't stop them from doing things. We just need to really focus on what are those things that are our job to do? What rules are we supposed to be enforcing, and how do we do that? And I think, it's really important that boards and managers and just residents generally consider we are trying to enforce conduct, not status. So, it's not there's nothing illegal about being an alcoholic or a mentally ill person or all these other different things. The issue arises when people harm other people, or they damage property, or they make too much noise, or they don't do what they're supposed to do, that the community is supposed to be together. And so HOAs need to be really careful to make sure that they're staying in their lane. And I know I keep saying that, but it's so important that they really only enforce those things that they are charged with enforcing. So, a police officer has a much broader range of things that they're supposed to be enforcing, and they have better tools to be able to handle that. I'm like, well, if you do something really bad, I'm going to write you a letter and call you to a hearing. So, you need to be really clear about like who you're calling. Like, your house is on fire. You're not going to call me and I'm going to write a letter saying don't play with matches. You can call the fire department. They're going to come put the fire out. And in the same way, if somebody's selling drugs next door, or they're doing other things that damage the safety of the entire community, we need to be really careful to decide, is that really a CC&R problem, or is that a law enforcement problem, and you need to get law enforcement involved to handle it? Who are you calling as the correct responder to the problem is really important.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about earlier with the retired police captain Ross about creating a relationship with law enforcement so that they can do their job in their lane and the association can do their job as well. And it's an interesting point you bring up. So when we're talking about that, he had suggested some ways to have like the community lead officer participate or get to know the community. He said documentation was really important. But he also said that you can like proactively sign some trespassing type, we want to have this go to some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, conviction, or to be in the person to be, I can't think of the word, but.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've found is, the police do have limited, just as I have limited authority to try and enforce, the law generally, unfortunately, but, the police also, that they, we call them, they show up. If nothing's going on, there's not a lot they can do. And so, like, for example, I've had a situation recently where we had a resident who is living with a pretty high degree of mental illness, and she got off her meds and like basically just flipped out, and she broke into 2 units with a hammer, and caused a lot of property damage. And there was a resident in one of the units, and so she barricaded herself in the bed. I mean, terrifying. This is just a horrible thing, right? Yeah. So nobody was actually injured. A lot of property was damaged, and she went on her merry way. And so we were trying to figure out, like, how do we deal with this? Because the residents are terrified, rightly so, right? The family of this woman is trying to figure out what to do, and they're actually not that cooperative at this point. So we're trying to balance this whole thing. We're calling the police, and they're like, well, nothing's happening right now. We'll take a report. We'll, do the thing. And so it's a real combination of trying to identify what the actual issues are. So the first one, the issue is that we needed to keep our residents and our employees like physically safe from each other. We didn't want this woman to be injured either. And we wanted everybody to be safe. And so we did end up going to court to get a restraining order, so that people say, these restraining orders are worth only the paper they're written on, and they are to some degree. It's not, again, if somebody comes at you with a weapon and you're like, I got a piece of paper, it's not going to help. It doesn't help. But what it does help with is it establishes a legal mechanism whereby if we call the police and we say, she's at it again, we're afraid for her safety and for our safety, now the police do have some authority to act. And so it's giving everybody like a legal framework to respond in a way that would be a little more a more robust response than if we hadn't done that groundwork to establish, like, we've had an issue here before, we've got a judge to sign off saying, this person's not allowed to be within a certain distance of these people or to engage in certain conduct. And if she does, then the police can come and, they can take her to get different help or support that she needs rather than being alone in her place. So I think that taking those kind of steps to anticipate what you might need in terms of working with the police is really helpful, because I think they're just as frustrated as we are when they show up and there's nothing that can be done about a situation where obviously some action needs to be taken, but nobody can figure out exactly what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And the restraining order process, is that fairly quick, or is that a long kind of, I think sometimes people worry that it's long. And
the answer is both. The two residents who were involved, who, in the example that I gave, where their units were damaged and broken into, they were able to go and get, a temporary restraining order by themselves without hiring counsel. There's a pretty easy form you fill out. The courts are very supportive of this. And so they went in and they got that fairly quickly. We, as an association, also went to court, and this was a much longer, more protracted process because we were trying to get a permanent restraining order and also to get her out of the unit and out of the community into a more supportive living environment for her that we thought would be more appropriate, because just a residential condominium project, we don't have any medical care, we don't have any psychiatric care, we don't have any of that stuff. So that process has been pretty lengthy and a lot more expensive because, trying to get somebody out of their place if they don't want to leave is complicated. And, but the initial, like, if somebody's in imminent danger, that restraining order process is pretty quick and it's pretty inexpensive and it's pretty straightforward. And the courts are pretty supportive of it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Another question is, what about, I know we talked about this resident particularly that you're talking about and had experience with. So when there's mental illness that's implicated, is there anything else about handling that situation that we want to instruct board members about?
Yeah, I think that police departments are doing a really good job to try and have different teams and communities that are specially trained and are funded to respond to mental health emergencies as opposed to criminal activity. And I think that we've recognized that, having police officers show up in uniform, armed, to do all this, this thing, it's not the best approach to actually solving a situation where somebody's in a crisis and maybe a harm to themselves or others. And so I know that Contra Costa County, where I live, has a big program that they're doing, and they're working with the Walnut Creek Police and all the local police departments to have dedicated teams that are responding to mental health crises. And I think, and they call it the 3A program. You can call anyone, anywhere, anytime can call, this particular response team to get somebody who's trained in this particular way. And so rather than escalating a situation, they can de-escalate it and actually get people connected with the resources they need to get the support they need to get better, to get whatever care and treatment they need rather than harming themselves or their community that they live in. So I think that's been really important. And I think people need to know that when they call the police, that may be an option that they need to discuss, and that may be a response that's appropriate. And so they need to give enough information to that dispatcher so that people know this is a mental health issue and we need that mental health response team to come, not a whole bunch of people who are going to come and look into a burglary or some sort of other violent issue. So I think that's been a huge improvement for that. The other thing I would say is that people are sometimes really reluctant to call social services or some of these other social support agencies that we have, because they think, oh, well, they'll, I don't know. I mean, you can make an anonymous report to these things. And these are people who really are trained to evaluate and look at a situation and try and connect people with resources that we have in the community to deal with mental health problems. And I think that, it may be frustrating and you don't always get an immediate result, but there really is a lot of effort on the part of our local agencies to try and provide that support. And that really is the appropriate venue to be using. That agency, that's their entire reason for existence, is to help support people who need either emotional or mental health or other kinds of support. And especially if you're talking about a child or an older person, we don't want these vulnerable citizens to be, taken advantage of. And so an HOA strictly doesn't have the obligation or the responsibility to do that. And I do encourage my boards not to get over involved in people's personal issues. They need to make sure that it really affects the common area or the community as a whole. But as individuals, or sometimes as boards, we can call these agencies to come in and do a professional evaluation and get people the help they need.
Right. Well, is there any other legal liability that you think is worth mentioning to the folks on here that they should consider if there's a crime or a homeless person or anything going on in their community?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It kind of, it's kind of the question, right, for me. So, like I said, there's no HOA police per se. And a lot of times, we've been saying, this is not, it's not the, our primary role is care of property, but and we tell people, and I put in my documents all the time, the association's not responsible for resident safety and security. That's your own responsibility. You got to call 911 if you got a problem. You got all this stuff. Our security people are there to protect property, not you. We're really sorry, so it goes. But this isn't 100% true. And, it comes out of course, just terrible case law. The Francis T. Village Green case was that case that we talk about a lot. And that case came out of a situation where a community had really inadequate lighting and other security problems. And there was a lot of crime involved. And one of the residents lived in a particularly dark area of the condominium project. She wanted to put more lighting in. The board said no. And, shortly after that, she was raped in the community, which is just awful, right? So awful. And, the court said, basically, hey, association, you have a duty of care to your residents in terms of maintaining property in a way that's safe and providing basic safety concerns to them in the property. And that this was foreseeable because you knew that there was a problem with the dark, and the lack of lighting, and yet you didn't take the reasonable steps necessary. And so it really is important that communities do kind of they assess what's going on in their community and pay attention to it. And if you have an obligation to maintain lighting, you need to make sure that lighting is maintained. You need to change those light bulbs. And if you got parking lots that are too dark and people are having problems with them, you may need to install more lighting to do that. That's reasonable for an association to do in maintaining its common area. And similarly, if you have, a gate management system or you have some sort of security system, you need to keep control of your key fobs. You need to keep these things in working order. And you need to take some enforcement action against people that either try to disable them or give up the codes to people or are propping doors open. If people are doing this, you need to take action to tell them, you can't do that. That endangers our whole community. We all need to follow these rules. And that's something foreseeable. Like the association set up a system, they have an obligation to enforce it and to make sure that it's working properly. So I'm part of making sure it's working properly is making sure these gates work and that the key fobs are working and this stuff. And another thing it relates to surveillance cameras, which I think can be a pretty useful tool that an association can use. And it comes with a whole nother host of problems that could be an entire session we did separately. But these are all reasonable things for an association to do to try and do that. They're not obligated to hire security full-time to keep everybody safe and do the thing. But, keeping the property maintained, lighting, fences, gates, security systems that are in place and security surveillance systems. If you've got them, you need to keep them up and you need to make sure that everybody's using them properly and responsibly. So that is a duty of care that you would have as an association towards residents to keep everybody safe and secure in the community.
I have one more question and then I know we have to wrap it up and I know we're going a little over, but it has to do with surveillance monitoring. And I think you were inferring it a little bit. Is there any liability with board members having access to this surveillance? Like you said, it's on your cell phone and the boards have the ability to look at the pool area at any time. And I've had this come up. So is a policy the right answer? Like what's your quick kind of recommend?
Yeah, so I do think the policy is the answer. And, I think, directors have a very heightened responsibility. They have a heightened fiduciary duty, including a confidentiality and to use the resources of the community responsibly. And so, obviously they can't be going and looking at the surveillance cameras and then gossiping with people about it. Like this is not okay. Most directors wouldn't want to do that anyway. But I think it really is helpful to have a surveillance camera policy available so that exactly how you're going to use that footage and who you're going to share it with. So you may want to say, we share it with the police upon request anytime, or you may say, we only share it if they have a subpoena, or, you may say, directors can review footage to make sure to see who broke into the trash enclosure and did whatever, bad things, or the pool, or whatever your issue is, whatever it is. I think it's really helpful to have it set out directly in a policy so there's no question. And I think that there's also there's really not a situation where, absent a subpoena, I would be giving that footage to any other resident or anybody else that wasn't the board or the managing agent of the community, because there is an expectation of privacy. And if you're not in a common area, but you're using footage in a different way in that way. And so I think before you provide it to somebody, you want to make sure that it's appropriate. And the best way to make sure it's appropriate is to think about it beforehand. Here are the situations that we anticipate might happen. Here's how we deal with the footage, and here's how we give it to people. And then everybody knows, what the situation is. And of course, if you're not sure and there's a problem, then consulting with legal counsel is really your best bet with that. You don't want to freestyle that. You want to just make sure you have somebody, who knows the law and like all these things, provide the advice, and then the board can rely on that as part of their fiduciary duty and protect themselves.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Melissa. I think an amazing takeaway: never freestyle a policy or those rules. It's a really good idea.
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for this. We really appreciate it. I think you've given a lot of great advice, and I think that's it for us on safety and security.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Appreciate it very much.
As a quick recap, today we heard legislative updates for next year with Adrienne Adams. We also got to understand how to prepare your HOA with the declining economy with Regina, Derek, and myself. You got some tangible tips there on how to increase revenue, as well as how to decrease expenses, and got a little bit of information from Regina about how to look at the future financially. We also heard about loans and special assessments. Craig Lee Huntington gave us some information about how to approach special assessments and obtaining loans. So hopefully you have some more information on whether or not that's a good option for you as an association, and certainly gives you some information to explore. We learned more about board dynamics, and also got water intrusion and insurance claims information from Sandra and Demetrius. And last but not least, we heard more about safety and security. We know this was a lot of information for you to digest, so rest assured, you will be able to find this information on our website about a week from now. You can find it at HOAorganizers.com. Again, I sincerely want to thank you for joining us today. I know you invested your Saturday to be here. We look forward to seeing you next year, and I do want to wish you a happy and healthy holiday season and a wonderful new year. Thank you again for joining us for the 10th annual ABCs of HOAs, a year that is very special to all of us. Thank you and take great care.